Hey there, tonight we're diving into the life of Malcolm X, a voice for change. And what you're about to discover is how his journey from troubled youth to influential leader was as much a personal transformation as it was a fight for justice. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. In the spring of 1925, the world got a little more colorful with the birth of Malcolm Little in Omaha, Nebraska. That's right, Malcolm X wasn't born with an X as a suffix. That came later. Malcolm entered a world that wasn't exactly rolling out the red carpet for African-American families, especially not in the heartland of America. The little family knew firsthand the sting of racial discrimination, and boy, did it leave a lasting mark on young Malcolm. Now, let's set the scene here. Malcolm's father, Earl Little, was a Baptist preacher and an outspoken advocate for Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association. Earl wasn't exactly quiet about his belief in black pride and self-reliance, and this made him quite a few enemies. Not the kind of guy who'd get a Neighborhood Watch award, if you catch my drift. His activism led to frequent visits from unfriendly guests, namely the Ku Klux Klan, who were more about burning crosses than baking cookies for newcomers. It's hardly surprising that the little family had to pack up and move multiple times, eventually settling in Lansing, Michigan, where the hostility was just as palpable, but at least the scenery was different. Life wasn't all doom and gloom for Malcolm, though. Even as a boy, he had a spark that couldn't be dimmed by the oppressive weight of racial prejudice. Known for his mischievous streak, young Malcolm was the kind of kid who could turn a dull afternoon into a full-blown escapade. His hair, a bright reddish hue that stood out in a crowd, earned him the nickname Red. And trust me, he wore that nickname like a badge of honor. It wasn't just his hair color that made him stand out. It was his flair for pranks and a smirk that seemed to say, "I know something you don't." One of the more humorous tales from Malcolm's childhood involves a little incident with a teacher. Now, picture this. A classroom full of kids, the teacher droning on about arithmetic or some such. Young Malcolm, with his keen mind and restless energy, wasn't content to just sit and listen. He once brought a whoopee cushion to class, a classic gag, sure, but timeless for a reason. The resulting noise sent the classroom into chaos and gave Malcolm a reputation as the class clown, who knew that the boy who loved a good prank would grow up to challenge the very fabric of American society. But just as quickly as laughter filled the room, the harsh realities of life would seep back in. The little family's troubles were far from over. In 1931, when Malcolm was just 6 years old, his father died in a streetcar accident, or so the official story goes. Many, including Malcolm himself, believed Earl Little was murdered by white supremacists who had long targeted him for his activism. The supposed accident smelled fishy, and not in the good seafood platter kind of way. The Littles were left not only to grieve, but also to fend for themselves in an unforgiving world. Without Earl, the family struggled financially. Louise Little, Malcolm's mother, worked tirelessly to keep her brood fed and clothed. She took odd jobs and even started a small garden to put food on the table. Despite her efforts, the family was eventually torn apart by economic hardship and systemic racism, the kind that doesn't make for a heartwarming family sitcom. In 1939, when Malcolm was 14, his mother was admitted to a mental institution, a devastating blow that scattered the little children into different foster homes. Malcolm's journey through the foster care system was another chapter in the saga of his complex and often tumultuous early years. It was here that the harsh realities of racial discrimination reared their ugly head again. While other kids were dreaming of becoming astronauts or baseball stars, Malcolm was told by a teacher that his aspirations of becoming a lawyer were no realistic goal for a nigger. Talk about a dream crusher. This was the kind of discouragement that could snuff out the brightest of futures. But not for Malcolm. His response wasn't despair, but a steely determination that would later fuel his fiery rhetoric. As a teenager, Malcolm moved to Boston to live with his half-sister, Ella. This was when he fully embraced the nickname Red and the city life that came with it. Boston's bustling streets were a far cry from the rural settings of his childhood, and Malcolm thrived in the urban environment. He quickly adapted to the vibrant nightlife, even working as a shoeshine boy at the Roseland Ballroom. It wasn't long before he was hustling with the best of them, his quick wit and charm making him a standout figure on the local scene. Malcolm's early life wasn't just a series of unfortunate events. It was a crucible that forged his character. It was the perfect storm of adversity, laughter, and a fierce sense of justice that shaped the man who would later become a pivotal figure in the civil rights movement. And while the world saw him as a revolutionary, his roots tell the story of a boy who navigated the complexities of race, identity, and family with a mix of humor and resilience. So the next time you think of Malcolm X, remember that beneath the iconic glasses and stern expression was a man shaped by a childhood as colorful and complex as his hair. As Malcolm settled into Boston's vibrant chaos, it wasn't just the city's skyline that captivated him. No, it was the electric hum of opportunity, or perhaps the sly whisper of mischief, that piqued his interest. Malcolm quickly learned that Boston's streets were a schooling of their own, and the curriculum, well, let's just say it involved more sleight of hand than scholarly pursuits. Our boy Red wasn't just kicking back in Beantown. He was diving headfirst into the underground world of petty crime. He played the part of a hustler with an ease that suggested not just survival, but a kind of street-smart artistry. You see, in the 1940s, Boston was a melting pot of cultures, innovation, and let's be honest, a bit of lawlessness. Malcolm found himself in the thick of it, rubbing shoulders with gamblers and grifters, and navigating a social hierarchy that didn't exactly require a resume, more like a knack for reading people and situations. Malcolm's early gigs included everything from selling zoot suits to bootlegging liquor. Now, a zoot suit wasn't just a fashion statement. It was a defiant gesture against wartime austerity. These oversized suits were a middle finger to the establishment, and Malcolm wore his with pride. They were the perfect attire for a man who was about to take the New York City nightlife by storm. In 1943, Malcolm took his act on the road, heading to Harlem, the beating heart of Black America. Harlem was a cultural carnival where jazz filled the air, and the famous Carton Club drew crowds as diverse as the city itself. But for Malcolm, it was less about the music and more about the money. He quickly carved out a niche running numbers, a kind of illegal lottery, and peddling dope, all while dodging the ever-watchful eye of the law. Talk about multitasking. But as much as Harlem offered, it wasn't long before Malcolm's luck ran thin. In 1946, at the ripe age of 20, he was arrested for a string of burglaries and sentenced to 10 years at Massachusetts' Charlestown State Prison. It was a classic case of life comes at you fast. Behind bars, Malcolm faced a new challenge: boredom. Prison wasn't exactly a hotbed of excitement, and for a man used to the buzz of city life, the monotony was suffocating. Yet, it was in this unlikely setting that Malcolm's transformation began. Armed not with a shiv, but with a dictionary, he embarked on a journey from hustler to scholar. The Nation of Islam entered his life like a lightning bolt, courtesy of his siblings who introduced him to its teachings. Founded by Wallace Fard Muhammad and led by Elijah Muhammad, the nation preached a message of black empowerment and self-reliance, a message that resonated deeply with Malcolm. Prison became Malcolm's university. He devoured books, from philosophy to history, and expanded his vocabulary word by painstaking word. He even joked that he copied the entire dictionary by hand, a task that would make even the most diligent student break a sweat. But for Malcolm, it was more than an academic exercise. It was an act of liberation. Each new word was a key, unlocking the doors of ignorance and opening pathways to new ideas. The transformation wasn't just intellectual, it was spiritual. The Nation of Islam provided Malcolm with a framework to understand his experiences and the systemic racism that shaped them. He found solace in the teachings of Elijah Muhammad, who painted a vivid picture of a world where black people could reclaim their dignity and destiny. It was a message that lit a fire in Malcolm's soul, one that would eventually fuel his tireless activism. And let's not forget the debates. Oh, the debates. Malcolm became a regular participant in the prison's debates, honing his skills in argumentation and rhetoric. He was known for his sharp tongue and even sharper wit, often leaving his opponents scrambling for a rebuttal. It was here that Malcolm's formidable oratory skills began to take shape, skills that would later electrify audiences and unsettle the status quo. So, while the world outside continued to spin with post-war optimism and the birth of rock and roll, Malcolm was undergoing a metamorphosis behind prison walls. He emerged not as the boy who once pulled pranks with whoopee cushions, but as a man on a mission, armed with knowledge, conviction, and an unyielding sense of purpose. The streets of Boston and New York had taught him survival, but it was in the solitude of his cell that Malcolm X was truly born. And this was just the beginning of a story that would challenge the very foundations of American society. From the confines of a prison cell to the bustling streets of America, Malcolm X's transformation was nothing short of extraordinary. It wasn't long after his release in 1952 that Malcolm dove headfirst into the world of the Nation of Islam, a movement that was about as subtle as a sledgehammer when it came to addressing racial issues in America. With his dynamic charisma, Malcolm quickly ascended the ranks, becoming the national spokesperson for the nation. And boy, did he have a knack for drawing a crowd. Picture this. It's the 1950, and America is steeped in post-war prosperity, or so they'd have you believe. For African Americans, the so-called American dream remained a tantalizing mirage. Hugh Malcolm, with his fiery rhetoric and unapologetic critiques of systemic racism. He was the guy who didn't just rock the boat. He capsized it and asked why everyone was surprised they got wet. Malcolm's speeches were events unto themselves, drawing thousands eager to hear his unfiltered truth. In 1959 alone, he spoke at over 120 public events. That's more gigs than the Rolling Stones in their heyday. Malcolm's style was a blend of sharp wit and raw honesty, garnished with a sprinkle of humor that made his heavy messages a little easier to digest. One of his famous lines was, "We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. The rock was landed on us." It was a punchy way of saying that African Americans had been handed the short end of the stick for centuries. His words were incendiary, but they were also a balm for those who felt voiceless, echoing a sense of justified rage that simmered beneath the surface of polite society. But let's not mistake his public persona for the whole picture. Behind the scenes, Malcolm was a master strategist, meticulously planning his next moves like a chess grandmaster who saw the board 20 steps ahead. He wasn't just about shouting from the rooftops. He was deeply involved in organizing the nation's activities and expanding its influence. Under his watch, the number of Nation of Islam temples grew from 14 in 1952 to over 50 by 1963. That's not just growth, that's a full-blown movement. Yet, while Malcolm's public image was that of a lone wolf challenging the establishment, the reality was a little more nuanced. He worked tirelessly to build coalitions, recognizing that a unified front was more effective than solo heroics. One of his key strategies was to engage with young people, who he saw as the vanguard of change. He was a regular at college campuses, where his speeches would often leave students questioning everything they thought they knew. Economically speaking, Malcolm was acutely aware of the power of financial independence. He encouraged black-owned businesses and self-reliance, urging followers to support each other economically as a form of empowerment. This was a time when the median income for African American families was less than half that of white families. Malcolm's call for economic solidarity wasn't just rhetoric, it was a survival strategy. Now, let's talk myths, because Malcolm X has no shortage of those. Many saw him as an unyielding radical, a man who spoke only in absolutes. But the truth is, Malcolm's views evolved significantly over time. While his early speeches were marked by a stark us versus them mentality, his later years showed a willingness to embrace more inclusive approaches. This wasn't so much a 180-degree turn, as it was a natural progression for a man who constantly challenged himself and the world around him. One myth that needs a good debunking is the idea that Malcolm was all about division. Sure, he didn't mince words when it came to calling out inequality, but he was also deeply committed to truth and justice, no matter where it led him. He famously said, "I'm for truth, no matter who tells it. I'm for justice, no matter who it is for or against." It was this commitment that slowly began to shift his perspective, allowing him to see allies where others saw only adversaries. Malcolm's relationship with the media was a complicated dance of mutual necessity and distrust. He knew the power of a well-timed headline and wasn't above using the press to amplify his message. However, he was also keenly aware of how his words could be twisted. During a 1959 television documentary titled The Hate That Hate Produced, Malcolm's fiery rhetoric was framed in a way that alarmed many Americans. It painted the Nation of Islam as a militant group, with Malcolm as its most articulate and dangerous advocate. The program was a double-edged sword. It brought the nation unprecedented attention, but also reinforced negative stereotypes. Behind the curtain, Malcolm's life was a whirlwind of activity. He was constantly on the move, delivering speeches, organizing events, and meeting with community leaders. It was a grind that would wear down even the most energetic of individuals. Yet, Malcolm thrived in this environment, driven by the urgency of his mission. His travels took him across the United States, from the urban centers of New York and Chicago to the less receptive territories of the South, where his message was often met with hostility. But Malcolm's rise wasn't without its challenges. The growing tensions between him and the Nation of Islam's leader, Elijah Muhammad, began to cast a shadow over his achievements. Malcolm's increasing popularity and evolving views started to unsettle the established order within the nation. His willingness to engage with civil rights leaders outside the nation's orbit and his openness to new ideas created friction with those who preferred a more insular approach. Malcolm's story in the 1950s is one of a man who didn't just ride the waves of change, he created them. His words were a clarion call to action, his actions a testament to the power of conviction. Yet, beneath the surface of his public persona lay a man grappling with the complexities of leadership and the weight of his own beliefs. As the 1960s loomed on the horizon, Malcolm X stood at a crossroads, ready to enter the next phase of his remarkable journey. As the 1960s rolled in, Malcolm X found himself navigating the uncertain waters of fame and internal politics like a captain steering through a storm with a broken compass. His growing disillusionment with the Nation of Islam was as palpable as a cold sweat in a sauna. The larger-than-life Malcolm, who had once been the nation's most ardent spokesperson, began to question the very foundation of the organization he had so fervently supported. And no, it wasn't just a case of the Monday blues. The cracks started to appear as early as 1962. Malcolm, always the sharp observer, noted discrepancies between the nation's teachings and its practices. The nation was supposed to be a bastion of moral uprightness, yet Malcolm couldn't ignore the whispers of hypocrisy swirling around its leader, Elijah Muhammad. Allegations surfaced about Elijah fathering children with multiple women within the organization, an awkward revelation for a group that preached strict moral codes. Malcolm was caught in a moral paradox. Could he continue to champion a cause that didn't practice what it preached? Now, let's set the economic and social scene. The early 60s were a time of great upheaval. The civil rights movement was gaining momentum, and America was being forced to confront its racial sins. The median income for African-American families still lagged behind, at just 55% of their white counterparts. Unemployment rates were twice as high for black Americans as for whites. In this climate of inequality, Malcolm's voice was more crucial than ever. But the nation's reluctance to engage with the broader civil rights movement was becoming a sticking point. Malcolm, ever the pragmatist, saw the potential for alliances that the nation was all too willing to ignore. His frustration wasn't just with the internal politics of the Nation of Islam, but with its insular view on race relations. While the nation promoted a separatist ideology, Malcolm began to suspect that the path to true equality might require a broader coalition. He was becoming increasingly open to dialogue with other civil rights leaders, a thought as radical as a vegan at a barbecue. This growing rift was exacerbated by Malcolm's incessant drive to address the systemic issues that plagued black Americans, a drive not entirely shared by the nation's leadership. By 1963, the tension reached a boiling point. Malcolm's comment following President Kennedy's assassination, "Chickens coming home to roost," was seen as so incendiary that Elijah Muhammad publicly silenced him for 90 days. It was a clear sign that Malcolm's star had risen too high for the nation's comfort. The suspension was both a slap on the wrist and a nudge out the door, signaling that his days with the nation were numbered. The disillusionment reached its crescendo in 1964, when Malcolm announced his departure from the Nation of Islam. It was a seismic shift, akin to a rock star going solo after a bitter breakup. But rather than retreat into obscurity, Malcolm X embarked on a journey that would redefine his worldview and his role in the fight for equality. Enter the Hajj, the Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca, a journey that would be both a spiritual awakening and a political epiphany. As Malcolm traveled to Saudi Arabia, he encountered a form of Islam that was far removed from the racial ideologies of the nation. In Mecca, Malcolm witnessed a unity among Muslims of all backgrounds, a tapestry of humanity that defied the racial lines drawn back home. In his own words, Mecca was a revelation. Malcolm discovered a colorblind Islam, one that saw no distinction between the races, just a shared faith. He prayed alongside Muslims of every hue, sharing meals and conversations that transcended the boundaries he had known all his life. This eye-opening experience was like swapping out a pair of black and white glasses for 3D lenses, revealing a world of vibrant color and possibility. The pilgrimage didn't just change Malcolm's view of Islam, it transformed his understanding of race relations. He returned to America with a new perspective, one that embraced diversity and unity over division and separatism. Malcolm, once the firebrand who had preached racial separation, now spoke of a global brotherhood that transcended color. It was a shift as profound as a caterpillar becoming a butterfly, though far less cliché. With his new vision, Malcolm founded the Muslim Mosque, Inc., and the Organization of Afro-American Unity, OAU, signaling his commitment to a broader civil rights struggle. The OAU was particularly significant, as it aimed to unite all people of African descent in the fight against oppression. It was a call to action that transcended national borders, inviting global solidarity in the struggle for human rights. But let's not romanticize Malcolm's transformation as some overnight miracle. This was a man who had spent years wrestling with the complexities of identity and justice. His newfound perspective didn't erase his past convictions. Rather, it built upon them, adding layers of nuance and empathy. Malcolm's journey was a testament to the power of evolution, a reminder that even the most steadfast beliefs can be reshaped by experience and reflection. Malcolm's return to the United States was marked by a renewed vigor and an expanded vision. He became a vocal advocate for human rights, engaging with leaders from across the civil rights spectrum. In a twist of fate, the man once considered too radical for mainstream America was now reaching out to build bridges. Malcolm X, the iconoclast, was becoming Malcolm X, the unifier. Yet, his transformation wasn't without its challenges. The shift in his ideology drew criticism from former allies within the Nation of Islam, and his willingness to work with new allies sometimes led to tension with those who remembered his earlier, more militant stance. But Malcolm was undeterred, driven by a conviction that the fight for equality required unity and understanding. The irony was not lost on him. The very system he had once decried as irredeemably racist now held the potential for change, a potential that could only be realized through collaboration. It was a radical notion for a man who had spent much of his life advocating for separation, and yet it was this very shift that would cement his legacy as a visionary leader. So, what's the takeaway from Malcolm's pilgrimage to Mecca and his subsequent transformation? It's a story of growth, of a man who dared to challenge not only society, but also himself. Malcolm X's evolution from a voice of division to a proponent of unity is a testament to the power of open-mindedness and the courage it takes to change one's perspective. His journey reminds us that history isn't a series of static events, but a dynamic narrative shaped by individuals willing to take risks and embrace new ideas. Malcolm X's life serves as a powerful reminder that even the most entrenched beliefs can evolve, and that real change often comes from within. As we look back on this chapter of Malcolm X's story, we're left with a sense of anticipation, knowing that his journey was far from over. The transformation he underwent in Mecca was just one part of a larger narrative, a narrative that would continue to unfold in the years to come. His story is a testament to the complexity of the human spirit, a reminder that the fight for justice is as much about personal growth as it is about societal change. As Malcolm X continued his journey, He was a man on a mission, and not the kind you could sum up with a catchy movie tagline. With the establishment of the Organization of Afro-American Unity, OAU, in 1964, Malcolm aimed to create a broad-based coalition that would unite people of African descent across the globe. This wasn't just a group with a clever acronym. It was a bold attempt to redefine the civil rights struggle as a human rights issue. He envisioned the OAU as a kind of United Nations for Black America, advocating for racial justice on an international scale. The OAU Charter, unveiled at its first public rally on June 28, 1964, in New York City, was a manifesto of empowerment and solidarity. It wasn't just about civil rights. It was about dignity, self-reliance, and a collective voice against oppression. Malcolm's vision for the OAU was as ambitious as a cat deciding to swim the Atlantic. He wanted to tackle everything from voter registration and education to economic independence and cultural awareness. The organization was open to all races, a stark contrast to the separatist stance he'd once championed. This was Malcolm 2.0, a man who understood that the fight for equality needed allies, not just adversaries. Speaking of allies, Malcolm wasn't just building bridges. He was practically constructing highways. He reached out to African leaders, seeking to connect the struggles of African Americans with those of newly independent African nations. This was a time when the African continent was experiencing a wave of decolonization, with countries like Ghana and Nigeria gaining independence from European powers. Malcolm saw an opportunity for a transatlantic alliance, a strategy as forward-thinking as it was audacious. It was an approach that recognized the interconnectedness of struggles against oppression, whether they were happening in Alabama or Accra. Of course, Malcolm's bold ideas didn't win him any popularity contests with the FBI or his former associates in the Nation of Islam. J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI's head honcho with a penchant for paranoia, had long considered Malcolm a dangerous radical. The FBI's surveillance of Malcolm's activities was as intense as a teenager's obsession with their first crush, minus the romance. Malcolm's every move was scrutinized, and his efforts to build international solidarity were seen as a threat to the status quo. The FBI's interest in Malcolm wasn't just about keeping tabs. It was about containment, a strategy of suppression dressed up as national security. As Malcolm's influence grew, so did the threats against him. His split from the Nation of Islam had created bitter enemies, and his willingness to challenge the status quo made him a target. He received numerous death threats, a grim reminder that his advocacy came with a hefty price tag. But Malcolm, ever the fearless crusader, pressed on, driven by a conviction as unshakable as a mountain in a hurricane. Now, let's tackle the elephant in the room, Malcolm's assassination. On February 21, 1965, while preparing to address an audience at the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem, Malcolm X was gunned down. He was just 39 years old, a fact that underscores the urgency and intensity with which he approached his mission. The assassination was a tragedy that reverberated far beyond the walls of the ballroom, a seismic event that shook the civil rights movement to its core. The official narrative pinned the blame on members of the Nation of Islam, with 3 men, Talmadge Hayer, Norman 3X Butler, and Thomas 15X Johnson, convicted of the murder. Yet, questions lingered like a stubborn stain on a white shirt. Was there more to the story than a simple act of vengeance? Some have speculated about the involvement of government agencies, given the FBI's extensive surveillance and documented efforts to destabilize black leaders. The murky waters of conspiracy theories are tempting to dive into, but the truth remains elusive, shrouded in a fog of secrecy and intrigue. Malcolm's death was a devastating blow, but it didn't extinguish the flame of his legacy. In the years following his assassination, Malcolm X became a symbol of resistance, a beacon for those who dared to challenge injustice. His autobiography, co-authored with Alex Haley and published posthumously, became a defining text of the civil rights era, selling millions of copies and translating his life story into a powerful narrative of transformation and defiance. Malcolm's legacy is a tapestry woven from the threads of his uncompromising quest for justice and his evolution from a preacher of separation to an advocate for unity. He left behind a blueprint for activism that continues to inspire movements around the world. From the Black Power movement of the late 60s and 70s To today's Black Lives Matter, Malcolm's influence is as enduring as the echoes of his speeches, as relevant as ever in a world still grappling with racial inequities. So, how might Malcolm view today's world? Well, if we could channel his spirit for a moment, he'd probably have a few choice words about the state of affairs. He'd likely marvel at the progress made since his time, the election of a black president, the rise of powerful black voices in media and politics, and the global resonance of movements for racial justice. But Malcolm, ever the realist, would also see the work still left to do. He'd point out that while the landscape has changed, the underlying structures of inequality remain stubbornly intact, like weeds in a well-tended garden. Malcolm would likely appreciate the power of social media as a tool for activism, a platform that amplifies voices once confined to the margins. But he'd also caution against the dangers of performative allyship, the kind of activism that's more about hashtags than hard work. Malcolm, with his unflinching honesty, would remind us that true change requires more than slogans. It demands action, accountability, and an unwavering commitment to justice. In a world where the struggle for equality is as multifaceted as a diamond, Malcolm's legacy shines as a reminder of what's possible when courage meets conviction. His life was a testament to the power of transformation, a journey that took him from the streets of Harlem to the halls of international diplomacy. Malcolm X was more than a historical figure. He was a catalyst for change, a man whose ideas continue to challenge and inspire, urging us to look beyond the surface and dig deeper into the complexities of race, power, and humanity. As we wrap up this exploration of Malcolm X's life, let's remember him not just as a man of his time, but as a man for all time, a leader whose vision transcended the boundaries of his era, leaving a legacy as vibrant and vital as the day he first took the stage. In his words, the future belongs to those who prepare for it today. And in that spirit, let's carry forward his mission, armed with the knowledge that the fight for justice is an ongoing journey, one that requires each of us to rise to the challenge with eyes wide open and hearts full of purpose. In the land of Ethiopia, where legends and reality often dance a tantalizing tango, the story of Emperor Menelik Roman II bursts forth with all the vibrant energy of a political thriller. Born in 1844 in the region of Shua, a place known for its rugged terrain and equally tough politics, Suleiman, as he was originally named, was thrust into a world where power was the ultimate currency and alliances were as slippery as a buttered eel. The young prince had a knack for politics that outshone many of his elders, a talent that would soon become as legendary as the man himself. Menelik's early life reads like a primer on how to navigate the Byzantine labyrinth of Ethiopian nobility. His father, Haile Melekart, was the king of Shua, but when the youngster was just 11, he was captured by Emperor Tewodros Roman II and taken north to the imperial court. Now, some might say this was a traumatic event, but Menelik, ever the strategic thinker, saw it as an educational opportunity. If you're going to be held captive, you might as well learn a few things about empire building, right? Fast forward to 1865, Menelik, now in his early 20s, and with a quicksilver mind to match his ambitions, escaped his gilded cage during the chaos that ensued after Tewodros' death. Back in Shua, he set about rebuilding his father's army and establishing his own power base. He was like a chess grandmaster, always thinking several moves ahead, and soon he declared himself king of Shua. A bold move, but then again, audacity was practically his middle name. The Ethiopian political landscape at the time was about as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. Various regional rulers were jostling for power, each with their own claims and ambitions. Menelik, though, had a vision. He saw a united Ethiopia, and he was willing to play the long game to achieve it. This meant strategic alliances, and what better way to cement power than through marriage? Enter Empress Tedu, Menelik's formidable partner in both life and politics. Tedu was no shrinking violet. She was a powerhouse in her own right. Their marriage in 1889 wasn't just a romantic union. It was a masterstroke of political strategy. Tedu hailed from the northern regions, and her connections were invaluable. Together, they were the power couple of Ethiopia, with Tedu often serving as Menelik's most trusted advisor. Forget modern political couples. These two were the real deal, combining brains and brawn to outwit their rivals. Now, it's not all serious business in the annals of Menelik's rise to power. There are stories, sometimes humorous, sometimes downright bizarre, of his early political maneuvers. Take, for instance, the tale of how Menelik, ever the diplomat, managed to pacify a rival warlord with a gift of horses. Yes, horses. Not gold, not land. Just a few fine steeds. It was a gesture that said, "I respect you, and I also know exactly what you need." Because in a land where mobility equaled power, a good horse was worth its weight in gold. Menelik also had a penchant for technology, which would later earn him the title of modernizer. But in these early days, his curiosity about the wider world was already apparent. He reportedly had a fascination with clocks, of all things, and even sent emissaries to Europe to bring back the latest in timekeeping technology. Imagine being so forward-thinking that you're concerned with punctuality while everyone else is just trying to hold onto their crowns. Talk about seeing the bigger picture. By the late 19th century, Menelik was well on his way to achieving his vision of a unified Ethiopia. His strategic acumen and ability to forge alliances had made him a force to be reckoned with. But it wasn't just his political savvy that set him apart. It was his ability to adapt and innovate. While others were stuck in old ways, Menelik was always looking forward, always ready to embrace new ideas and technologies that could strengthen his empire. So, as we leave this opening chapter of Menelik's life, remember that the man who would become one of Africa's greatest leaders was, at heart, a pragmatist with a flair for the dramatic. Whether he was dodging political traps or setting his sights on modernization, Menelik Roman II life was a testament to the power of vision and the courage to pursue it, no matter how daunting the path. As they say, fortune favors the bold, and Menelik was nothing if not bold. As Menelik set his sights on the horizon, he wasn't just dreaming of a united Ethiopia. He was imagining an Ethiopia that could stand toe-to-toe with the giants of the world, one that could communicate not just with its own regions, but with the entire planet. Enter technology, a love affair that will be both thrilling and awkward, like a first date with a robot. Let's start with the telephone, which in the late 1800 was the epitome of cutting edge. Imagine the scene. Addis Ababa, 1890s, dusty roads, bustling markets, and suddenly the unmistakable trill of a telephone. That's right, Menelik introduced the first telephone in Ethiopia, and it was nothing short of revolutionary. Imagine the local surprise when they heard voices coming out of a box, like a magic trick without the sleight of hand. For Menelik, it was a way to modernize communication, a step towards integrating Ethiopia into the global community. But it wasn't just about the novelty, it was about control. With a phone, Menelik could instantly reach his generals, advisors, and even distant regions. It was like giving a megaphone to a maestro in a world where drums and runners had been the norm. But here's where it gets delightfully human. The first phone call. Well, it was apparently between Menelik and Tedu, and legend has it that she was more than a little skeptical of the contraption. Why, she might have wondered, should I talk to a box when I can just yell across the palace? Yet, despite the initial hiccups, the introduction of the telephone was a game changer, a harbinger of things to come. It paved the way for more technological adventures, each more ambitious than the last. Now, if the telephone was a triumph, the arrival of the first automobile in Addis Ababa was more of a comedic sketch. Picture this, a car, a foreign marvel, rolling into a city where the closest thing to wheels were the ox carts lumbering along dusty paths. The year was 1907, and the car was a gift from the French government, a gesture of diplomacy wrapped in horsepower. Except there was one tiny hiccup. No one knew how to drive it. The car might as well have been a spaceship for all the good it did. It sat there, a gleaming promise of modernity, while its potential drivers scratched their heads in confusion. Eventually, Menelik's men managed to figure out the basics, but not before the car was the butt of many jokes and a symbol of the sometimes clumsy dance with progress. These stories of technological flirtations are charming, but let's not get carried away with visions of seamless transitions. Modernization wasn't a smooth ride on freshly paved roads. It was more like an off-road adventure with plenty of bumps. Economically, these changes were seismic shifts. Take the telephone. Installing lines across the rugged Ethiopian landscape was no small feat, requiring both manpower and money. The economic costs were significant, and the returns weren't immediately clear. Not everyone was thrilled about these newfangled devices. Some saw them as unnecessary distractions or even sorcery. Socially, the introduction of such technology had a ripple effect. It wasn't just about having a phone or a car. It was about what those things represented. These were symbols of a new era, a break from tradition, and not everyone was on board with that. For many, the old ways were comfortable and familiar, while the new technology was bewildering and alien. Menelik was pushing Ethiopia forward, but he was also walking a tightrope, balancing progress with tradition. Yet, despite the challenges, Menelik's efforts to modernize were nothing short of visionary. He saw the potential for these technologies to transform Ethiopia, to connect it not just internally, but with the wider world. He understood that to compete on the global stage, Ethiopia needed more than just strong armies and strategic alliances. It needed innovation. And so, Menelik's fascination with technology wasn't just a hobby. It was a strategic move, a way to ensure Ethiopia's sovereignty in a rapidly changing world. Of course, modernization wasn't just about gadgets and gizmos. It extended to infrastructure, education, and even the economy. Roads were built, schools were established, and trade networks expanded. Menelik was laying the groundwork for an Ethiopia that could thrive in the 20th century. But again, let's not romanticize the process. Building a road in Ethiopia was like trying to lay a carpet over a mountain range. No easy task. It required resources, planning, and sometimes a little bit of luck. In the realm of education, Menelik was equally ambitious. He understood that for Ethiopia to truly modernize, its people needed access to knowledge. Schools were opened, and efforts were made to educate the next generation. But it wasn't just about reading and writing. It was about teaching the skills needed in a modern world. This was a radical shift, and for many, a welcome one. But as with all change, it came with resistance. The old guard saw these new ideas as a threat to the established order, and there were those who preferred the comfort of the familiar to the uncertainty of the new. Economically, Menelik's modernization efforts were both a boon and a challenge. On one hand, the introduction of new technologies and infrastructure boosted trade and opened up new markets. On the other hand, the costs were significant, and the benefits weren't always immediately apparent. It was a gamble, one that required both vision and patience. But Menelik was nothing if not tenacious, and he was willing to stake his legacy on the belief that these changes would pay off in the long run. So, as we delve deeper into Menelik's reign, remember that his modernization efforts were more than just a series of amusing anecdotes. They were a testament to his understanding of the bigger picture, his willingness to embrace change, and his determination to secure Ethiopia's place in the world. Menelik wasn't just a ruler, he was a visionary, a man who saw beyond the present to the possibilities of the future. And while the road to modernization was anything but smooth, it was a journey worth taking, a journey that would forever alter the course of Ethiopian history. As Menelik Roman II ambitiously charted Ethiopia's course into the 20th century, he faced a formidable challenge that would define his legacy, the Battle of Adwa. This wasn't just another skirmish over territory. It was a full-blown test of wits and will between an African kingdom and a European power. In 1896, Italy, harboring imperial ambitions that were bigger than its boot-shaped peninsula, attempted to bring Ethiopia under its colonial heel. Spoiler alert, it didn't go as planned. Let's dive into the international drama and strategic genius that led to this historic showdown. Italy, with a penchant for overestimating its capabilities, had signed the Treaty of Wuchale with Ethiopia in 1889. The treaty was supposed to be a friendly agreement, but thanks to a language snafu, or, let's be real, a deliberate mistranslation, Italy claimed that Ethiopia was now a protectorate. Menelik, who must have had an eye roll for the ages, called their bluff. He wasn't about to let some paper tiger dictate the fate of his nation. Fast forward to 1895. Italy, perhaps emboldened by too much espresso and not enough geopolitical sense, decided to enforce its claims militarily. Enter Menelik Roman II, the man of the hour, who rallied an estimated 100,000 troops from every corner of Ethiopia. And we aren't talking about a ragtag militia. These were seasoned warriors with diverse backgrounds, from Shuans to Oromos to Tigrians, each with their own style of combat. Menelik's ability to unite these factions was nothing short of miraculous, and it was his first stroke of genius. The Battle of Adwa, fought on March 1, 1896, was a masterclass in military strategy. Menelik, with his tactical acumen, had scouts relaying Italian movements, allowing him to position his forces strategically across the rugged terrain of the Adwa Mountains. The Italians, led by General Orst Baratieri, underestimated both the size of Menelik's army and the complexity of the landscape. Talk about a colossal underestimation, the kind that turns you into the punchline of history's jokes. Italian forces numbered around 17,000, but they were scattered and disoriented, thanks to conflicting orders and the treacherous Ethiopian terrain that played merry hell with their European-style warfare. Menelik's forces, on the other hand, were well-prepared, well-fed, and highly motivated. They used the high ground to their advantage, employing guerrilla tactics that would make any modern strategist nod in approval. The clash was brutal, with Ethiopian forces overwhelming Italian positions, capturing artillery, and driving the invaders into retreat. But let's not romanticize this too much. Warfare, as always, was a grim affair. The battle resulted in significant casualties on both sides, an estimated 6,000 to 7,000 Italian and 4,000 Ethiopian soldiers lost their lives. It was a sobering reminder of the high cost of imperial hubris and the fierce determination of a nation fighting for its sovereignty. The victory was decisive, but the scars ran deep on both sides of the conflict. The aftermath of Adwa was a geopolitical earthquake. Italy's defeat was so stunning that it sent shockwaves through Europe. Here was an African nation that had not just resisted colonization, but had humiliated a European power on the battlefield. It was a narrative-busting event, challenging the prevailing colonial mindset that had assumed European superiority was a given. Menelik's victory at Adwa became a beacon of hope for other colonized nations, a symbol of resistance and the possibility of self-determination. In Italy, the defeat triggered a political crisis. The government of Prime Minister Francesco Crispi, who had been one of the architects of the colonial adventure, collapsed under the weight of recriminations and public outrage. The Italian populace, not thrilled with the idea of their sons being shipped off to fight a war of questionable merit, demanded answers. It was an expensive lesson in the limits of military adventurism, one that cost Italy dearly in both human lives and national prestige. For Ethiopia, the victory cemented Menelik Roman II status as a national hero and a shrewd leader who had outmaneuvered a major European power. The battle also secured Ethiopia's sovereignty, at least for the foreseeable future, and enabled Menelik to negotiate from a position of strength. The subsequent Treaty of Addis Ababa, signed in October 1896, annulled the previous treaty's contentious clauses, reaffirming Ethiopian independence and forcing Italy to recognize it. In other words, Menelik had turned the tables, and the world took notice. It's easy to get caught up in the romance of Adwa, a David versus Goliath story with a triumphant ending, but it's also crucial to recognize the complexities and harsh realities behind the legend. Menelik's victory was as much about strategic brilliance and the willingness of a diverse nation to rally behind a common cause as it was about military might. The battle underscored the importance of unity in the face of external threats and highlighted the need for strong leadership. Menelik's triumph didn't just resonate within Ethiopia. It echoed across the African continent and the African diaspora, serving as a powerful reminder of what could be achieved through determination and unity. It was an inspiration for future generations of African leaders and freedom fighters who saw in Ethiopia's victory a validation of their own struggles against colonial domination. Yet, while the Battle of Adwa was a defining moment, it was not the end of Ethiopia's challenges. The victory secured Ethiopia's independence, but it also set the stage for the country's ongoing efforts to modernize and strengthen its place in an increasingly interconnected world. Menelik's vision for Ethiopia was far from complete, and the battle was just one chapter in his ongoing quest to secure a future for his nation that was both prosperous and independent. As we continue to explore Menelik Roman II reign, it's clear that his legacy is one of resilience, adaptability, and an unyielding commitment to his country's sovereignty. The Battle of Adwa may have been a high point, but it was also a pivotal moment that galvanized Menelik's resolve to continue building an Ethiopia that could stand on its own terms. So, stay tuned as we delve into the next chapter of Menelik's reign, where the challenges of governance and modernization await, filled with both triumphs and trials that would further shape Ethiopia's path into the modern era. As the dust settled from the Battle of Adwa, Menelik Roman II was not about to rest on his laurels. No, he had a nation to consolidate and a reputation to maintain. The victory had put Ethiopia on the map, but now came the tricky part, keeping it there without becoming a footnote in someone else's history book. It was time to play the diplomatic game, and Menelik was ready to shuffle the deck. In the world of international diplomacy, gifts aren't just tokens of goodwill. They're tools of persuasion, negotiation, and sometimes downright bribery. Menelik understood this well. After all, who could resist a leader who sent exotic lions as presents? Yes, you heard right. The man gifted lions to foreign dignitaries. It's the kind of gesture that says, I'm a powerful king with access to the coolest wildlife, and I know how to make an impression. And impress he did, fostering alliances and friendships, or at least cordial relations, with countries like Russia, France, and Britain. Let's break down some of those diplomatic moves. In 1897, Menelik received a Russian diplomatic mission, an entourage that came bearing gifts like modern weapons and military advisors. Talk about knowing your audience. Menelik, in return, sent them back with lavish gifts, including gold, ivory, and yes, a lion. It was a trade that left both sides smiling and nodding, the international equivalent of a successful Tinder date. But it wasn't all about gifts and grins. Menelik was astutely aware that international diplomacy was as much about perception as it was about power. After the Adwa victory, European nations were forced to reckon with Ethiopia not as a backwater to be colonized, but as a sovereign state with a savvy leader. Menelik's ability to navigate these choppy waters was nothing short of diplomatic wizardry. He knew when to play hardball and when to extend an olive branch, or in his case, a lion's paw. However, Ethiopia wasn't just dealing with external pressures. Internally, Menelik faced a landscape as rugged and unpredictable as the Ethiopian highlands themselves. The country was a patchwork of regions, each with its own leaders, loyalties, and agendas. Keeping it all together was like trying to juggle flaming torches while riding a unicycle. Impressive if you can pull it off, disastrous if you can't. Regional rivalries were as much a part of Ethiopian politics as coffee ceremonies were of its culture. Take Ras Mangasha of Tigray, for instance. He was a formidable regional ruler who didn't always see eye to eye with Menelik's centralizing ambitions. The tensions between Menelik and his regional warlords were like an elaborate game of chess, with each move carefully calculated to keep the balance of power stable. It wasn't just about military strength. It was about political finesse, the kind that demands a keen understanding of human nature and an uncanny ability to predict your opponent's next move. Yet, for all his political acumen, Menelik was not immune to the pressures of leadership. His health began to fail in the early 1900s, adding another layer of complexity to his reign. It was one thing to manage a realm when you're in your prime. It's another thing entirely when you're battling illness. Menelik's declining health was a well-kept secret, managed with the kind of discretion that would make modern public relations teams proud. But the reality was unavoidable. Ethiopia needed a clear line of succession to avoid plunging into chaos. Here's where things get dicey. Menelik's selection of an heir was no simple matter. His choice, Lij Iyasu, was young, untested, and to put it mildly, a bit of a wild card. Iyasu's penchant for unpredictable behavior was the stuff of legend, and while Menelik had hoped to mold him into a capable ruler, the task was daunting. It was a gamble, one that would have implications long after Menelik was gone. In the meantime, Menelik's wife, Empress Tedu, was stepping into the spotlight with her characteristic blend of charm and shrewdness. She was a force to be reckoned with, wielding influence in court politics and acting as a stabilizing presence during Menelik's illness. Tedu's contributions were indispensable, yet often overshadowed by the larger-than-life narrative of her husband's reign. But let's be clear. Behind every great emperor is an equally formidable empress. and Taydu was no exception. As Menelik navigated these internal and external challenges, he did so with an unyielding commitment to Ethiopian independence. The victory at Adwa had been a defining moment, but it was merely the beginning of a longer journey. Menelik's vision for Ethiopia was one of sovereignty, modernization, and unity, a trifecta that required both bold leadership and careful diplomacy. The road ahead was fraught with obstacles, from regional tensions to the ever-present threat of foreign intervention. Yet, despite these challenges, Menelik's legacy was taking shape. He had transformed Ethiopia's status on the world stage, securing its place as a sovereign nation in an era of rampant colonialism. His reign was a testament to the power of vision, determination, and the ability to adapt in a world that was constantly changing. As we prepare to delve into the final chapter of Menelik's extraordinary life, remember that his story is one of resilience and resourcefulness. It's a saga of a leader who dared to defy the odds, who saw beyond the immediate to the potential of a united and independent Ethiopia. Menelik Roman II's journey is far from over, and as we continue to explore his legacy, we'll uncover the final pieces of a story that has captivated generations and continues to inspire those who dare to dream of a better future. And so, we arrive at the twilight of Menelik Roman II's reign, a time as rich in complexity as a cup of Ethiopian coffee, with enough intrigue to keep even the most jaded historian on the edge of their seat. As Menelik's health waned, his empire was still very much alive, bustling with the energy of a nation at a crossroads. Picture a leader who had spent decades shaping a nation, now grappling with the inevitable reality of transition. His later years were a mix of triumphs and trials, a testament to the delicate art of maintaining power while preparing to pass the baton. By the early 1900s, whispers of Menelik's declining health were circulating like the latest gossip at a royal court. The emperor suffered a series of strokes starting in 1909, leaving him partially paralyzed and with a slurred speech, an unfortunate twist for a man whose words had once commanded armies and swayed nations. But in true Menelik fashion, he didn't let a little thing like impaired mobility stop him from ruling. Instead, he leaned on his trusted advisors, and more importantly, on Empress Taydu, who stepped up to the plate like a seasoned pro in a political game she knew all too well. Taydu wasn't just filling it. She was a force in her own right, navigating the treacherous waters of court politics with the grace of a seasoned diplomat and the resolve of a warrior queen. Yet, even her formidable presence couldn't erase the looming question of succession. Enter Iyasu, Menelik's chosen heir, a choice that might have seemed as unpredictable as a wild card in poker. Iyasu's youthful exuberance was both a blessing and a curse. While he had the energy and charisma to inspire, his erratic behavior and unorthodox alliances were enough to give seasoned politicians a collective heartburn. Iyasu's reign, albeit brief, was marked by bold and sometimes bewildering moves. His attempts to modernize Ethiopia and forge unconventional alliances, particularly with the Muslim community, raised eyebrows and blood pressures among Ethiopia's conservative elite. It was a political juggling act performed without a net, and ultimately it didn't end well. By 1916, Iyasu was deposed in a coup, a dramatic twist that would have made for a gripping season finale in any political drama. And yet, the drama of succession wasn't just about power plays and palace intrigue. It was a poignant reminder of the fragility of dynastic politics and the challenges of maintaining continuity in a world that was rapidly changing. Menelik's dream of a unified Ethiopia was a work in progress, one that required both vision and pragmatism, a balancing act that was as delicate as it was daring. As we reflect on Menelik Roman II's legacy, it's tempting to get swept up in the romanticism of his reign, the victorious battles, the grand diplomatic gestures, the modernization efforts that propelled Ethiopia onto the world stage. But behind the legend lies a more nuanced reality, one that reveals the complexities of leadership and the intricate dance between power and responsibility. Menelik's impact on Ethiopian identity was profound, shaping the nation's sense of self in an era where self-determination was a rare and precious commodity. Under Menelik's rule, Ethiopia became synonymous with resilience, a beacon of hope for colonized nations across Africa and beyond. His victory at the Battle of Adwa was more than just a military triumph. It was a powerful narrative of defiance that challenged the colonial status quo and inspired generations of freedom fighters. Yet, it's crucial to remember that this victory was not the result of a single man's genius, but a collective effort, a tapestry woven from the diverse threads of Ethiopian society. And let's not forget the humor in Menelik's larger-than-life persona. Here was a man who could navigate the complexities of international diplomacy while simultaneously confounding foreign dignitaries with gifts of lions. A leader who introduced telephones and automobiles to Ethiopia with the same enthusiasm as a kid at a tech fair. Menelik's legacy is as colorful as it is complex, a testament to the rich tapestry of history where myth and reality often intertwine. As we draw connections to modern Ethiopia, Menelik's influence is unmistakable. The foundations he laid for a sovereign and modern nation continue to resonate in the country's cultural and political landscapes. Ethiopia's commitment to preserving its independence, its emphasis on unity amidst diversity, and its ongoing quest for modernization all bear the imprint of Menelik's vision. The challenges of balancing progress with tradition, of embracing innovation while honoring heritage, these are echoes of Menelik's era, reverberating through the corridors of Ethiopian history. In the end, Menelik Roman II's story is one of resilience and resourcefulness, of a leader who dared to dream of a better future and had the courage to pursue it. His reign was a masterclass in the art of leadership, a reminder that true power lies not just in the ability to conquer, but in the wisdom to inspire and unite. As we bid farewell to this chapter of history, we carry with us the lessons of Menelik's legacy, a legacy that continues to inspire, challenge, and captivate those who dare to dream of a world where self-determination is not just a possibility, but a reality. In the vibrant chaos of 19th century Madagascar, where the political landscape was as unpredictable as a tropical storm, a woman named Ranavalona managed to pull off what can only be described as an epic game of royal musical chairs. Born around 1788, Ranavalona wasn't exactly what you'd call heir-apparent material. Her dad was a nobody in the grand scheme of things, until he stumbled upon a royal coup plot and tattled to the then-king, Andrian Ampoinimarina. His reward, a promise that his daughter would marry into royalty. And just like that, Ranavalona's ticket to the top was punched. Now, let's pause for a moment to appreciate just how bonkers this was. Imagine your dad scoring you a royal marriage because he had a knack for eavesdropping. It's like a medieval version of winning the lottery, except your prize is a lifetime of palace drama. And drama, dear friends, was served in abundance. Ranavalona's marriage to Radama I, who would become king of Madagascar in 1810, was less of a love story and more of a strategic chess move. Radama, a ruler with grand visions, was all about modernization and cozying up to European powers. He was the kind of guy who'd probably have a LinkedIn profile today, boasting about his extensive network and ambitious projects. He wanted to turn Madagascar into the next big thing, but Ranavalona had different ideas. She was less interested in rubbing elbows with Europeans and more into keeping the island's traditions alive, a clash of cultures that would come to define her reign. When Radama died in 1828, a power vacuum formed, and Ranavalona did what any savvy player in a game of Thrones would do. She seized the throne with the kind of determination that makes you wonder if she had a playlist titled Conquest Jams. But it wasn't an easy grab. There were a slew of relatives and nobles who had a more legitimate claim to the throne, not to mention the European advisors who probably thought they'd have a say in the matter. But Ranavalona was nothing if not resourceful. Over a few months of what we can only imagine were some very awkward family dinners and a couple of suspiciously timed demises, she emerged victorious. Consider the political landscape of Madagascar at the time, a patchwork of tribal allegiances, colonial interests, and local power plays. It was a field ripe for manipulation, and Ranavalona had the instincts of a seasoned poker player. Her ascension to power wasn't just a stroke of luck. It was a masterclass in cunning strategy and a testament to her survival skills. The woman had a knack for turning the tables, often quite literally, on her adversaries. Ranavalona's rise to power certainly ruffled some feathers. The Europeans, who thought they'd have a puppet on the throne, found themselves dealing with a queen who had zero interest in playing by their rules. She promptly booted out foreign advisors and put the brakes on Raydama's modernization train. Her reign would be marked by a fierce dedication to maintaining Madagascar's sovereignty and traditions, even if it meant taking a hard line against outsiders. And let's be clear, her methods could make Machiavelli blush. But let's not sugarcoat it. Ranavalona's reign was brutal. She ruled with an iron fist, and her tactics were as subtle as a sledgehammer. Yet, in a world where women were often sidelined, she was a force to be reckoned with. Her story is one of survival in a man's world, where every move was a calculated risk and alliances were as fragile as a house of cards. She wasn't just playing the game, she was rewriting the rules. So, as we delve into the life of Queen Ranavalona, keep in mind that her story is not one of fairy tale romance or gentle governance. It's a tale of power, politics, and the relentless pursuit of autonomy. She may not have been the queen anyone expected, but she was undoubtedly the one Madagascar got. Welcome to the reign of a queen who defied the odds, outlasted her rivals, and left an indelible mark on history. In the grand tapestry of history, Queen Ranavalona's reign stands out like a particularly thorny vine. Her governance was a blend of audacious strategy and unyielding resolve, leaving a legacy that has been debated by historians, celebrated by some, and vilified by others. Let's jump right into the thick of it. Ranavalona's iron-fisted rule. You see, Ranavalona wasn't just about maintaining traditions. She was about enforcing them with the kind of fervor that would make a zealot blush. Take, for instance, her labor system, the Fanampona. This wasn't your run-of-the-mill 9-to-5 gig. It was mandatory service that could make even the most arduous corporate internships look like a vacation. Every able-bodied Malagasy was conscripted for state projects, from building roads to serving in the army, all without the modern conveniences of a paycheck or a benefits package. It was a system that kept the kingdom running, but at a human cost that was staggering. This system was less about economic efficiency and more about consolidating power, making sure everyone knew exactly who was boss. And then there was her treatment of rivals, which was as warm and fuzzy as a porcupine hug. Political opponents weren't just sidelined. They were often removed with extreme prejudice. Imagine a court where the phrase, career-ending move, was taken quite literally. Ranavalona's rivals had a tendency to disappear in ways that raised eyebrows and lowered life expectancies. When it came to threats, real or imagined, Ranavalona was as subtle as a thunderstorm, ensuring her power remained unchallenged. But let's not forget a unique brand of diplomacy. Ranavalona had a knack for dealing with European colonizers that was as effective as it was unorthodox. While other leaders might have been seduced by the promises of European alliances, Ranavalona took a different route, the polite yet firm snub. Picture this: European emissaries arriving with grand visions of treaties, only to be met with a queen who had all the enthusiasm of a cat at bath time. Ranavalona was more interested in preserving Madagascar's sovereignty than playing nice with European powers. She famously expelled Christian missionaries and limited foreign influence, preferring to keep her island nation self-reliant. This was a risky play in a colonial world, and yet she managed to hold her ground with a smile and a wave, as if to say, thanks, but no thanks. Now, if you're looking for a deep dive into the bizarre, look no further than the infamous Tangina ordeal. This was a trial by poison where the accused had to ingest a poisonous nut. Survival was considered proof of innocence. It sounds like a plot twist from a dark fantasy novel, yet this was a staple of justice during Ranavalona's reign. The Tangina ordeal was not just a test of guilt or innocence. It was a testament to the Queen's iron grip on the populace. It's estimated that thousands perished under this system, a grim reminder that justice in her court was as much about control as it was about law. But hold your judgment for a moment. Let's peel back the layers of this historical onion. Was Ranavalona the monster that colonial narratives painted her to be, or is there more to the story? Colonial powers were notorious for demonizing leaders who resisted their advances. The French, in particular, had a vested interest in portraying her as a tyrant to justify their own imperial ambitions. While her rule was undoubtedly harsh, it's worth questioning how much of the legend was shaped by those who had something to gain from her downfall. Economically, Ranavalona's policies had a mixed bag of results. By limiting European influence, she maintained Madagascar's independence at a time when much of Africa was being carved up like a holiday turkey. Yet, this isolationist stance also stunted economic growth, as the kingdom missed out on technological advancements that could have come from more open trade. Her reign saw the building of infrastructure, roads, palaces, and fortifications, but it was all done on the backs of her people, with little in the way of modern machinery or techniques. In the grand chess game of history, Ranavalona was playing three-dimensional chess, while everyone else was still figuring out checkers. Her reign was a complex interplay of power, tradition, and resistance to colonialism, making it a fascinating study of a leader who refused to be a footnote in someone else's story. Yet, for all her cunning and strength, the question remains: did her uncompromising rule strengthen Madagascar in the long run, or did it sow the seeds of future turmoil? As we continue this exploration of Queen Ranavalona I, remember that history is rarely black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of perspectives and narratives, each adding depth to our understanding of the past. So, fasten your seatbelts, because this ride through the annals of Madagascar's history is far from over. Ranavalona's story is one of contradictions, complexities, and the relentless march of a queen who refused to bow to anyone, not even the tides of history itself. As we saunter further into the tangled web of Queen Ranavalona I's reign, we find ourselves knee-deep in the economic quagmire that was 19th century Madagascar. Picture this: an island paradise with a ruler who decided that playing nice with the European powers was overrated. Instead, she opted for a bold isolationist policy that would make even the most ardent hermit blush. Forget the delicate courtship of international trade. Ranavalona was all about turning inward, a strategy not unlike trying to build a sandcastle while the tide is rising. Now, let's talk about those European influences she so dramatically booted out. Ranavalona's disdain for European meddling was as fiery as a Malagasy sunset. Her agenda was clear: expel the missionaries, banish foreign advisors, and clamp down on Christianity like it was an invasive species. This wasn't just a cultural stance. It was a full-blown economic maneuver. By keeping the Europeans at bay, she aimed to foster a self-sufficient kingdom where traditional manufacturing could flourish. Sounds romantic, right? A land free from colonial influence, thriving on its own terms. But here's the kicker: the reality was a bit more complicated. Ranavalona's vision of economic independence was ambitious, and she was nothing if not determined. She prioritized local craftsmanship, encouraging the production of Malagasy goods that could rival imports. Think textiles and ironwork, crafted with the same pride you'd find in a Michelin-starred chef's kitchen. Yet, without the technological advances that trade could have brought, Madagascar's manufacturing sector was like a cart with square wheels. It moved, sure, but not with the grace or speed of its European counterparts. The Queen's insistence on traditional methods was admirable in its defiance, but less so in its practicality. And what about the people? The noble subjects of Madagascar, who bore the brunt of these economic policies. Ranavalona's reign saw the nation teetering on the knife's edge of self-sustainability and economic hardship. Her policies, while designed to protect the island's autonomy, inadvertently sowed seeds of discontent. The harshness of the Fanampona labor system was only exacerbated by the economic stagnation her isolationism caused. In a kingdom where survival often hinged on a bountiful harvest or the success of local industries, the people found themselves caught between a rock and a hard place. Ranavalona's strategy may have kept Madagascar under Malagasy control, but it came at a price. The economy, while isolated from the whims of European markets, struggled to grow. The island's self-imposed seclusion was a double-edged sword, offering safety from colonial domination, but also cutting off opportunities for technological and economic advancement. Her reign was a masterclass in paradoxes, a fiercely independent nation shackled by its own sovereignty. And what of the romantic notion of a queen who stood firm against the tide of colonialism? It's a narrative that holds a certain allure, like a bedtime story that hides the monsters under the bed. Yet, the harsh reality is that Madagascar's economy was mired in turmoil, its people burdened by the weight of Ranavalona's policies. The Queen's legacy is one of complexity. where the line between heroism and tyranny is as blurred as the horizon at dusk. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater just yet. Ranavalona's attempts to build a self-sufficient kingdom were not without merit. Her reign saw the construction of roads, fortresses, and palaces, all testaments to her indomitable will. These projects, while labor-intensive and costly, were vital in maintaining internal stability and asserting Madagascar's sovereignty. They also served as a reminder of the Queen's vision, a kingdom resilient in the face of external pressures, even if it meant sacrificing short-term prosperity. Yet, the road to self-sufficiency was fraught with potholes. Without the benefits of external trade, Madagascar's economy was like a ship navigating stormy seas without a compass. The isolationist policies, designed to preserve cultural integrity, often led to shortages and inflation. Picture an economy where the price of staple goods could skyrocket faster than you can say supply and demand. This economic turbulence created a fertile ground for social unrest, as the Malagasy people grappled with the realities of living under a ruler who prioritized independence over comfort. But before we point fingers, let's consider the geopolitical chessboard Ranavalona was playing on. In an era where colonial powers were gobbling up territories like a game of Risk gone wild, her decision to keep Madagascar autonomous was a bold one, was a stance that required an iron will and a bit of creative navigation through the treacherous waters of international politics. The Queen's policies may have been harsh, but they were not without logic. In a world where bending to European demands often meant the erosion of sovereignty, Ranavalona's unyielding stance was a shield, albeit a heavy one. So, what do we make of this economic landscape under Queen Ranavalona I? It's a tale of ambition and consequence, where the dream of a self-sufficient Madagascar collided with the harsh realities of isolation. Her reign was a testament to the complexities of leadership, where every decision carried with it the weight of a nation's future. As we continue to unravel the threads of Ranavalona's story, remember that history is rarely a simple tale of right and wrong. It's a mosaic of choices and outcomes, shaped by the hands of those who dared to defy the status quo. And with that, we'll leave the story hanging in the balance, much like the fate of Madagascar under Ranavalona's rule. As we look forward to the next part of our journey, let's keep our eyes open and our minds sharp, for the twists and turns of history have only just begun to reveal themselves. As we navigate the tumultuous seas of Queen Ranavalona I's legacy, let's tackle the elephant in the historical room, her notorious label as the Mad Queen. Now, this wasn't just a catchy moniker tossed around by gossiping courtiers. It was a full-blown European PR campaign. Picture 19th century Europeans, pens in hand, painting Ranavalona not as a ruler, but as a villain from a Gothic novel. In their narratives, she was a tyrannical queen hell-bent on terrorizing her own people and thumbing her nose at the oh-so-civilized West. Quite the caricature, don't you think? But let's not kid ourselves. Ranavalona's reign did feature some truly terrifying tactics. Take her judicial system, which made Salem's witch trials look like a game of tag. The infamous Tangina ordeal we mentioned. It wasn't just a test. It was a cornerstone of her legal system. Thousands were subjected to this trial by poison, a grim testament to her commitment to maintain control. And then there's her military campaigns. Ranavalona wasn't one to let neighboring tribes get too cozy, often launching preemptive strikes to keep the peace, or at least her version of it. But was she truly mad, or just madly strategic? In the chessboard of colonial politics, she was a queen who refused to be a pawn. Her isolationist policies were as much about preserving Madagascar's sovereignty as they were about her own iron-fisted rule. The European narrative conveniently overlooked this, instead stoking the fires of imperialist propaganda. By painting her as a deranged despot, they justified their own ambitions in the region. After all, who wouldn't want to save a nation from the clutches of a mad monarch? Now, contrast this with Malagasy oral traditions, where Ranavalona is a different beast altogether. In these tales, she's not a monster, but a fierce protector of the land and its customs. Her reign is seen through a lens of resilience, a time when Madagascar stood defiantly against foreign encroachment. These stories don't shy away from her harshness, but frame it as necessary for survival. It's a narrative of empowerment, a queen who wielded her power to keep the island free from colonial chains. So why do some stories stick, while others fade into obscurity. It's all about who holds the pen. European writers had the printing press and global reach, while Malagasy stories were passed down through generations, whispered around firesides. In a world where the loudest voice often wins, the colonial narrative found its way into textbooks and travelogues, while the local perspective remained a cultural whisper. But let's not forget the bizarre rituals and cultural practices Ranavalona championed. Take the annual Bath Festival, where nobles plunged into sacred rivers to cleanse themselves of impurities, or the Zebu sacrifices, where cattle were offered to the ancestors in elaborate ceremonies. To the uninitiated, these might seem outlandish, but they were integral to maintaining societal harmony and appeasing spiritual forces. In Ranavalona's eyes, these were not just traditions, but vital threads in the fabric of Malagasy identity. Yet, it's easy to see why such practices fed into the Mad Queen myth. To European observers, these rituals were exotic and unsettling, fueling the narrative of a queen who was out of touch with modernity. But in reality, they were expressions of a culture striving to retain its essence in the face of overwhelming external pressure. Now, let's switch gears and talk numbers. During her reign, it's estimated that the population of Madagascar dwindled significantly, perhaps by as much as 50%. A combination of harsh labor practices, military campaigns, and the dreaded tangina led to this demographic decline. It's a sobering statistic that underscores the harshness of her rule, even as it highlights her unwavering commitment to sovereignty. The numbers don't lie, but they only tell part of the story. Economically, Ranavalona's Madagascar was a paradox. Her self-sufficiency policies were both a blessing and a curse. By cutting ties with Europe, she managed to keep foreign powers at bay, but at the cost of economic stagnation. The traditional industries she championed struggled without external trade, and while roads and infrastructure projects kept her kingdom running, they were built on the backs of an overworked populace. So, was Ranavalona a tyrant or a trailblazer? The answer lies somewhere in between. Her reign was a testament to the complexities of leadership, where every decision carried the weight of a nation's future. She wasn't the mad queen of European law, nor was she the saintly protector of Malagasy tradition. She was, quite simply, a ruler navigating the treacherous waters of a world on the brink of change. What's undeniable is Ranavalona's impact on Madagascar's identity. Her policies and practices left a lasting imprint, shaping the island's path long after her reign ended. She was a symbol of resistance and a reminder of the costs of sovereignty. Her story is a study in contradictions, where the line between heroism and tyranny is as blurred as a watercolor painting in the rain. As we pause to catch our breath in this whirlwind of history, remember that the tale of Queen Ranavalona is far from over. Her legacy is a living tapestry, woven with threads of power, tradition, and defiance. So, stay tuned as we continue to unravel the complexities of her reign and explore the reverberations of her rule in the next chapter of Madagascar's history. So, what happened after Queen Ranavalona took her final bow in 1861? Did Madagascar breathe a sigh of relief, or did the ghost of her reign linger like an unwelcome guest at a dinner party? Let's dive into the aftermath of her rule and see how the island, and the world, dealt with the legacy of a queen who refused to play by anyone's rules but her own. First off, the political shake-up was about as subtle as a bull in a china shop. Ranavalona's son, Ranavalona Roman II, took the throne and promptly started unrolling his mom's policies like they were last season's fashion. Imagine a kid who'd been grounded for years, finally getting the keys to the candy store. Ranavalona Roman II had his eyes set on modernization and re-engagement with Europe, eager to shake off the isolationist cloak his mother had draped over the kingdom. Unfortunately, his reign was short-lived, just 2 years. In 1863, he was assassinated in what seemed like a palace coup straight out of a Shakespearean tragedy, complete with the requisite betrayal and political intrigue. This abrupt end to Ranavalona Roman II reign was more than just a hiccup in Madagascar's royal lineage. It was a testament to the deep-rooted divisions that Ranavalona's rule had exacerbated. The power struggles and political machinations that followed were a direct consequence of her iron-fisted approach to governance. Her policies had kept the European powers at bay, but they also left a vacuum that was all too eagerly filled by internal factions vying for control. Economically, the island was like a ship trying to find its bearings after a storm. The isolationist policies of Ranavalona had left Madagascar with an infrastructure, yes, but one that was not quite capable of supporting the ambitions of a modernizing economy. Roads and fortresses might have been built, but the lack of trade meant that the wheels of commerce were rusted and creaky. Radama Roman II attempts to open up the economy were akin to trying to jump-start a car with a dead battery. The potential was there, but the execution fell flat, hampered by the lack of experience and the internal chaos that plagued his short reign. Socially, the island was a mosaic of tensions. Ranavalona's harsh rule had instilled a sense of resilience, sure, but it had also left scars. Her labor policies and the infamous Tangina trials were not easily forgotten. They lingered in the collective memory like a bad hangover, serving as a grim reminder of the costs of absolute power. The people of Madagascar were left to navigate the tricky balance between preserving their hard-won autonomy and embracing the winds of change that were sweeping across the globe. Historians today have a field day with Ranavalona's legacy, and for good reason. She was a ruler who defied categorization, a monarch whose reign was as enigmatic as it was impactful. On one hand, she's lauded as a nationalist hero, a queen who kept her kingdom free from colonial clutches at a time when much of Africa was being divvied up like slices of pizza at a college party. On the other, she's critiqued as a tyrant whose brutal methods and isolationist policies burdened her people with hardship and left the kingdom teetering on the brink of collapse. It's this duality that makes her story so captivating. She's not a one-dimensional villain or a spotless heroine. Instead, she's a complex figure whose actions were shaped by the tumultuous times in which she lived. Her reign forces us to grapple with the messy realities of power, where good intentions often collide with harsh consequences. It's a narrative that refuses to fit neatly into the boxes of good or bad, instead demanding a more nuanced understanding of what it means to rule in a world fraught with challenges and contradictions. And let's not forget the romantic allure of the Mad Queen myth. It's a story that's persisted through the ages, partly because it taps into our fascination with rulers who defy expectations, and partly because, let's face it, tales of tyranny and rebellion make for compelling storytelling. Yet, as with all legends, it's worth questioning how much of it is grounded in reality, and how much has been embellished by the passage of time and the pens of those who had their own agendas to push. Ranavalona's legacy is a tapestry woven with threads of power, resistance, and survival. It's a reminder that history isn't just a series of events, but a complex interplay of personalities, decisions, and the ever-present tug-of-war between past and future. Her reign may have ended over a century ago, but the echoes of her rule continue to resonate, challenging us to think critically about the narratives we inherit and the truths we choose to accept. In the end, was Queen Ranavalona a villain, a visionary, or simply misunderstood? Perhaps she was all three, a ruler whose story defies easy categorization and continues to captivate us with its rich tapestry of triumphs and trials. Her legacy is a testament to the complexities of leadership, where every decision is fraught with consequence and every action is a step in the dance of history. As we close the book on her reign, let's do so with an appreciation for the nuanced portrait of a queen who dared to defy the tides and left an indelible mark on the sands of time. You're standing on the edge of a world that stretches further than your imagination can grasp, where horizons blur into whispers of mystery and promise. The Silk Road isn't just a single artery of commerce, but a sprawling network of veins pulsing with the lifeblood of empires. It's the ultimate hustle, 7,000 miles of grit and glory that would test even the hardiest of souls. Now, you might think you're about to embark on some kind of glamorous adventure, like an ancient Indiana Jones, but hold your horses, or rather your camels. This road is as much about blistered feet and sand-choked throats as it is about silk and spices. The allure of easy riches, that's a fairy tale spun by those who never set foot on its dusty trails. First, let's talk geography. The Silk Road traverses an expanse so vast that it's hard to wrap your head around. From the bustling markets of Chang'an in China, all the way to the opulent bazaars of Constantinople, this isn't your Sunday stroll. We're talking deserts, mountains, and everything Mother Nature can throw at you. And let's not forget the Pamir Mountains, known as the roof of the world. A name that sounds majestic until you're actually gasping for air at 15,000 feet. The caravanserais, those ancient roadside inns, are your lifeline, offering not just shelter, but also the chance to swap news and tales with fellow travelers. These aren't your modern motels with complimentary breakfast. Think more along the lines of a medieval erbn, where your fellow guests might include a mischievous monkey or a grumpy camel. The romantic notion of a trader weighing down their saddlebags with gold. It's there for a reason, but let's set the record straight. The road doesn't just fork out fortunes. Sure, the silk you're peddling is worth its weight in, well, gold. A single bolt of the stuff could fetch you a small fortune in Rome. But by the time you've bartered your way from point A to point B, you might just be breaking even. The allure of silk was so intoxicating that it sparked a trade that could turn emperors green with envy. But the path to these riches is paved with peril, and the local bandits aren't just interested in your wares. They'd happily relieve you of your head, too. Truth is, for every trader who struck it rich, there were dozens more who returned with little more than a few interesting stories and a newfound appreciation for stable ground. Now, let's talk economy, because without understanding the why, the how is just a footnote. This road wasn't built on dreams alone. The demand for silk in the Roman Empire was insatiable. We're talking about a fashion craze that had aristocrats tripping over themselves for the latest Chinese imports. In fact, the Romans were so obsessed that Emperor Tiberius had to impose sumptuary laws to curb their silk addiction. But silk wasn't the only game in town. Spices, too, were a hot commodity, literally and figuratively. Pepper was worth its weight in silver, and nutmeg was practically a currency unto itself. These weren't just culinary luxuries. They were status symbols, the ancient equivalent of driving a Ferrari to your neighbor's housewarming. When you factor in the travel times, the Silk Road makes modern shipping delays look like a joke. A journey could take several months, sometimes even years, depending on the route and the season. When you set off, you're signing up for a life where time is measured in moons and the road is your only constant. So, if you're dreaming of a quick payday, think again. This is the long game, and patience is the only currency that won't devalue on the journey. But let's not forget the social and political backdrop. The Silk Road was as much a melting pot of cultures and ideas as it was a trade route. From Persian poets to Indian mathematicians, the mingling of minds is just as significant as the exchange of goods. And while the road was a conduit of wealth, it was also a theater of power. Empires rose and fell by controlling these routes. The Han dynasty, the Parthians, the Sassanids, they all knew that whoever commanded the Silk Road held the keys to an empire's treasury. Now, let's do some myth-busting. The idea of the Silk Road as a single, continuous path is about as real as a unicorn. In reality, it was a series of interconnected routes, each with its own challenges. The northern route skirted the Gobi Desert, while the southern path wound through the Taklamakan, whose name translates ominously to place of no return. Each route had its own risks and rewards, and your choice could mean the difference between success and disaster. So, there you are, a trader with dreams larger than your wallet, facing a road that promises everything and guarantees nothing. The Silk Road is a tale of ambition, danger, and the relentless pursuit of something greater than oneself. It's a story that's as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago, a reminder that the most extraordinary journeys are marked by both triumph and trial. As you set out on your path, remember, fortune favors the bold, but it never promised them an easy ride. So, as you lace up your metaphorical boots and prepare to hit the dusty trails of the Silk Road, let's dive into the political chessboard that shaped this legendary route. Spoiler alert. It's not all silk and roses. The Silk Road was as much a product of power struggles and imperial ambitions as it was about trade. Picture the Han dynasty, not just content with inventing paper and perfecting the art of bureaucracy, but also keen on expanding their influence westward. Under Emperor Wu of Han, we're talking 140-187 BCE, they weren't just sending out caravans. They were dispatching diplomats, generals, and the occasional spy. This wasn't just about commerce. It was about planting the Chinese flag in the farthest reaches of the known world. Now, if you think the Han were ambitious, wait till you hear about their Western counterparts. The Roman Empire, with its insatiable appetite for silk, was like a fashionista with a credit card and no spending limit. Silk was the Roman Empire's Achilles heel, a shimmering fabric that had the power to empty coffers faster than a chariot race. Roman senators were so hooked on the stuff that, by the time of Emperor Tiberius, they had to legislate against it. Silk, it turns out, wasn't just a fabric. It was a political statement, a whisper of Eastern opulence that spoke volumes about wealth and power. But let's not romanticize it too much. Behind every bolt of silk lay a web of taxes, tariffs, and yes, the occasional bribe. The Silk Road wasn't some idyllic trade utopia. It was more like a bureaucratic nightmare, with tolls and tariffs at every turn. The Han dynasty might have built the foundations, but it was the Parthians, and later the Sassanids, who perfected the art of the toll booth. Imagine the frustration of a trader, bags brimming with precious goods, only to be stopped at every border and asked to cough up a fee. And if you think modern taxes are bad, try dealing with a tax collector who operates with the moral compass of a pirate. Speaking of pirates, let's not forget about the infamous bandits who roamed the Silk Road like desert sharks. These weren't your run-of-the-mill pickpockets. We're talking about organized bands who could give the mafia a run for their money. The Taklamakan Desert, charmingly dubbed the Desert of Death, wasn't just a geographical hurdle. It was a playground for these marauders. Protection money was as much a part of your budget as food and water. Hiring mercenaries or striking deals with local warlords was just another line item on the Silk Road expense report. And if you skimped on security, well, your next stop might not be a bustling bazaar but the bottom of a sand dune. So, what did it cost to traverse this perilous path? Picture this. A caravan loaded with silk, spices, and other treasures could easily face tariffs that ate up 30% or more of their profits. You'd think the bandits would be the worst of it, but sometimes the officials were the real highway robbers. Yet, traders kept coming, driven by the promise of untold riches and the allure of the exotic. The truth is, the Silk Road was a gamble, a high-stakes game where the odds were stacked against you, but the jackpot was too tempting to ignore. And let's talk about the real politic of it all. The Silk Road wasn't just a trade route. It was a geopolitical tool. Whoever controlled the Silk Road controlled the flow of wealth and culture between East and West. The Han dynasty knew this, and they weren't shy about using diplomacy, military might, or strategic marriages to keep the road in check. On the other side, the Romans, Parthians, and later the Sassanids played their own games, each vying for a piece of the pie. This wasn't just about goods. It was about influence, a soft power that could sway empires. For all its dangers and complexities, the Silk Road was a symbol of something greater, the human drive to explore, to connect, to transcend borders. It was a tapestry woven from threads of ambition, greed, and curiosity. Each trader, whether a wealthy merchant or a humble peddler, contributed to a legacy that would shape the world for centuries. And while the road was rife with peril, it was also a testament to the resilience of those who dared to tread its paths. So, as you forge ahead on this epic journey, remember, the Silk Road is more than just a line on a map. It's a story of empires and individuals, of dreams and desperation. It's the ultimate test of endurance, where every step forward carries the weight of history. And while the road may be long, the stories it holds are well worth the journey. Keep your wits about you, and maybe, just maybe, you'll come out the other side with more than just tales of sand and silk. As you continue along this legendary path, the Silk Road unravels not just as a corridor of trade, but as a vibrant tapestry of cultures and ideologies. Imagine it as the world's most chaotic, unpredictable open-air conference, an ancient TED talk minus the tech glitches and overpriced coffee. Here, the foot-weary traders, the diplomatic envoys, and even the occasional Roman tourist, yes, they got around, mingled in a cacophony of languages and ideas that would make even modern multicultural festivals look like a neighborhood potluck. So, let's dive into the social dynamics of this ancient superhighway, where a simple exchange of goods could spark revolutions in thought. Picture a bustling caravanserai somewhere in Central Asia. It's a veritable Babel, with tongues wagging in everything from Mandarin to Sogdian, Greek to Sanskrit. You're not just swapping silk for spices here. You're trading philosophies, religious beliefs, and cutting-edge science. Talk about a cultural potluck. Let's start with the traders themselves. Chinese merchants were the rock stars of this ensemble, often traveling in caravans that would make a modern convoy look like a bike parade. They brought silk, of course, but also paper, tea, and ceramics, goods that would have Western elites clutching their pearls in delight. But they weren't just businessmen. They were cultural ambassadors, spreading Chinese innovations and ideas with every step. Then you've got the Persian middlemen, the masters of the trade game. These guys were the ultimate networkers, fluent in multiple languages and adept at navigating the complex web of tariffs and tolls. The Persians were the Silk Road's social glue, connecting East and West with a deftness that would make LinkedIn jealous. Their influence was so pervasive that Persian became the lingua franca of the Silk Road, much like English in today's global business world. And let's not forget the Romans. Picture them as the tourists who show up for the culture but stay for the shopping. They had a penchant for silk that bordered on the obsessive, and when they weren't haggling over prices, they were soaking up the exotic sights and sounds. Roman coins, stamped with the faces of emperors, found their way into the deepest corners of Asia, a testament to their reach and influence. This melting pot of cultures led to an exchange of ideas that would forever reshape the world. Take religion, for instance. Buddhism spread from India to China via the Silk Road, carried by monks whose journeys would make any modern spiritual pilgrimage look like a weekend retreat. These monks weren't just bringing a new faith. They were introducing art, literature, and philosophy that would profoundly influence Chinese culture. The spread of Buddhism is one of the Silk Road's most enduring legacies, a testament to the power of ideas to transcend borders. But Buddhism wasn't the only religion hitching a ride along these dusty trails. Nestorian Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and even early Islam made their way across the Silk Road, each leaving its mark on the civilizations it touched. The road was less a highway and more a spiritual crossroads, where beliefs mingled and morphed into new forms. Now, let's talk about the intellectual exchanges. The Silk Road was a conduit for knowledge as much as it was for goods. Chinese innovations like papermaking and gunpowder found their way to the West, while Greek philosophy and Indian mathematics flowed eastward. It was a two-way street, where an idea born in one corner of the world could ignite a revolution half a continent away. And it wasn't just high-minded science and philosophy that traveled the Silk Road. Folk tales, music, and even cooking techniques made the journey, enriching cultures along the way. A Persian trader might bring back tales of the Chinese dragon to his hometown, while an Indian merchant could introduce saffron to a Roman chef. The Silk Road was the original cultural exchange program, and its influence can still be tasted in the spices of a dish or heard in the notes of melody. But let's keep it real. For all the romantic notions of cultural exchange, the Silk Road was also a tough, unforgiving place. The idea of a harmonious mingling of cultures is tempting, but the reality was often more like a dysfunctional family reunion. Misunderstandings abounded, and tensions could flare over everything from trade disputes to religious differences. The road was a place where you might share a meal with a stranger one night and face off against them in a heated argument the next. Yet, despite the challenges, the Silk Road endured for centuries, a testament to the resilience of those who dared to traverse it. It was a place where cultures clashed and collaborated, where ideas were not just exchanged, but transformed. And in that transformation, the Silk Road left a legacy that continues to shape our world today. As you continue your journey along this storied path, remember that the Silk Road is more than just a series of trade routes. It's a reminder of the power of connectivity, of the human desire to reach out across vast distances and forge bonds that transcend borders. In a world that often seems divided, the Silk Road stands as a symbol of unity, a testament to our shared journey through history. So keep your eyes and mind open, because the road ahead is filled with stories waiting to be told. And so, as you trudge along the dusty trails of the Silk Road, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of what really kept this ancient superhighway ticking. No, it wasn't just the allure of silk or the promise of spices that fueled this epic journey. It was the logistics, those less glamorous but utterly essential gears that turned the wheels of trade. So buckle up, or well, tighten your camel's saddle, because we're about to get down to the brass tacks of trading on the Silk Road. First things first, the camel caravan. Forget your romantic notions of a lone trader heroically crossing the desert with nothing but a trusty steed and a heart full of dreams. In reality, traders traveled in caravans, massive convoys that could number anywhere from 100 to over 1,000 camels. These weren't just any camels either. We're talking about the Bactrian camel, the two-humped wonder of the ancient world, capable of carrying up to 400 pounds of cargo over treacherous terrain. It's like the SUV of the desert, only more environmentally friendly and with fewer cup holders. But why camels, you ask? Well, these hardy beasts could go up to 10 days without water, a crucial feature when your route takes you through the Taklamakan Desert, cheerfully dubbed the place of no return. And let's not forget their ability to withstand the temperature swings that would make a heart yoga class look like a cool breeze. From freezing nights to scorching days, camels were the ultimate multi-terrain transport, the original all-weather vehicle. Now, logistics weren't just about moving goods, they were also about securing them. Enter the world of trade contracts. You see, a successful trader wasn't just a master of barter. They were also a savvy negotiator with a keen eye for detail. Contracts were drawn up to outline everything from the division of profits to the handling of mishaps, because nothing says trust like a legally binding agreement. These contracts, inscribed on everything from parchment to bamboo, were the ancient world's equivalent of a prenup, ensuring that everyone got their fair share of the spoils, or at least that was the idea. And where did all these thrilling exchanges take place? Trading hubs, of course. Imagine Samarkand, a city whose very name conjures images of exotic allure and vibrant chaos. Nestled in modern-day Uzbekistan, Samarkand was more than just a pit stop. It was the beating heart of the Silk Road, a place where fortunes were made and dreams dashed. It wasn't just the goods that made Samarkand famous. It was the deals, the kind that could make or break a trader's career. Picture bustling bazaars filled with the clamor of negotiations conducted in a dozen languages, where a single misstep could cost you everything. And then there was Kashgar, the legendary oasis city. Straddling the crossroads between China and the Middle East, Kashgar was the ultimate melting pot, a place where cultures collided in a spectacular display of human ingenuity and resilience. Here, traders haggled over everything from silk to spices, their futures hinging on the outcome of these grueling negotiations. If Samarkand was the heart of the Silk Road, Kashgar was its soul, a testament to the enduring power of human connection. Of course, all this trading wasn't just about shoving goods from one place to another. It was about innovation. Take, for instance, the use of the abacus, a technological marvel that made accounting more than just a guessing game. Traders needed to keep track of vast inventories and complex transactions, and the abacus provided the kind of precision that would make even the most seasoned CPA tip their visor in respect. It was the original calculator, a tool that transformed chaos into order with the flick of a bead. And let's not overlook the technological marvel of paper money. Yes, you heard that right. Long before credit cards, or even the concept of cashless society, was a glimmer in anyone's eye, the Chinese were tinkering with the idea of paper currency. By the Tang dynasty, around the 7th century, these lightweight alternatives to heavy metal coins began to circulate along the Silk Road, revolutionizing trade by lightening the load, literally. It was a game changer, a precursor to the financial systems that underpin our modern economy. But let's not get too starry-eyed about paper money. While it was undoubtedly revolutionary, it also came with its own set of challenges. The risk of counterfeit was as real then as it is now, and the value of this early currency could fluctuate wildly, much like stocks in a volatile market. Traders had to be savvy, constantly on the lookout for fake notes, a reminder that even innovation comes with its pitfalls. Now let's talk about the ultimate logistical wizardry, the relay trade system. This ingenious method involved moving goods through a series of middlemen, each specializing in a particular section of the route. It was like a relay race, with goods passing from one trader to the next, each adding their own markup before sending them further along the line. This system not only sped up transactions, but also spread the risk, allowing traders to focus on their strengths while minimizing exposure to the road's many dangers. And while we're on the subject of innovation, let's not forget the role of the postal system. The Han Dynasty, never ones to let a good idea go unused, established a network of relay stations, precursors to the modern postal service, that allowed for swift communication across vast distances. Messages could be sent from Chang'an to Kashgar in a matter of days, a feat that would have been unthinkable just a few decades earlier. In a world where information was power, the ability to send a message at lightning speed was a strategic advantage, one that could mean the difference between success and failure. But hold on, before you start romanticizing the Silk Road as some kind of ancient utopia of efficiency, let's inject a dose of reality. The road was still fraught with peril, and no amount of innovation could completely safeguard against the unpredictability of life on the trails. Sandstorms, bandits, and disease were constant companions, and a single miscalculation could spell disaster. Traders had to be resourceful, adaptable, and above all resilient, qualities that were as valuable as the goods they carried. So, as you navigate the complex web of logistics that underpinned the Silk Road, remember that this was a world of contrasts, a place where innovation met adversity, where the promise of riches was always tempered by the risk of ruin. It's a story of human ingenuity and tenacity, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the drive to connect, to trade, and to explore can transcend the most daunting of challenges. As the journey continues, keep your eyes on the horizon and your wits about you. The Silk Road still has many tales to tell, and the road ahead promises both peril and possibility. Stay tuned, because the adventure is far from over. And so, as you trudge along the dusty trails of the Silk Road, let's wrap up this epic journey by examining its profound legacy. You see, while the Silk Road is often romanticized as a golden thread connecting east and west, the reality is more akin to a patchwork quilt, stitched together by a motley crew of traders, conquerors, and dreamers. This was no seamless journey of enlightenment. It was a rugged, unpredictable marathon across deserts and mountains, with a supporting cast of camels and caravans that would make a circus look organized. Let's start with the big picture. The Silk Road's impact on global history is akin to a stone thrown into a pond, creating ripples that spread far and wide. It wasn't just about the movement of goods, though let's be real, who wouldn't want a piece of silk to flaunt at a Roman dinner party? It was about the exchange of ideas, technology, and culture. Imagine the intellectual fireworks when Greek philosophy bumped into Indian mathematics and Chinese astronomy. This was the ancient world's version of a TED conference, minus the PowerPoint presentations. And then there's the economic context. The Silk Road was the backbone of ancient economies, a precursor to globalization before anyone knew what that meant. It turned cities like Samarkand and Kashgar into bustling metropolises, each a melting pot of languages and customs. These trade hubs weren't just stops on a map. They were economic powerhouses that fueled empires. The tax revenue alone could make a modern IRS agent weep with envy. Think tariffs, protection money, and the occasional bribe, all part of doing business in a world where the rules were as flexible as a yoga instructor. But was it all as glamorous as a sunset over the Pamir Mountains? Hardly. The romantic view of the Silk Road often glosses over the gritty realities. For every trader who struck it rich, countless others fell victim to bandits or succumbed to the harsh elements. It was a place where fortunes could turn on a dime, or rather, a denarius. Sure, the tales of daring adventurers and exotic markets make for a compelling narrative. But let's face it, the Silk Road was less a fairy tale and more a choose-your-own-adventure novel with a lot of dead ends. Yet, despite its challenges, the Silk Road endured for over a millennium, a testament to human resilience and ingenuity. It was a symbol of the interconnectedness of ancient economies, a network that linked distant lands in a web of trade and diplomacy. And while the road itself may have faded with the rise of maritime routes, its legacy lives on in today's globalized world. Modern trade routes, with their shipping containers and cargo planes, owe a debt to the camel caravans that once trudged across Asia. Speaking of modern parallels, consider the digital age. The internet is the new Silk Road, a virtual highway where information travels at the speed of light. Just as traders once exchanged goods and ideas along the ancient trails, today's entrepreneurs and innovators swap data and innovation across the ether. The same spirit of exploration and connection that drove Silk Road traders now fuels the digital pioneers of our era. It's a reminder that while technology changes, the human desire to connect remains constant. As we reflect on the Silk Road's legacy, it's clear that its story is one of both triumph and tragedy, a saga of ambition and adversity. It's a reminder that the most enduring journeys are those that challenge us, that push us to our limits and beyond. The Silk Road was more than just a trade route. It was a crucible of cultures, a place where civilizations clashed and collaborated, shaping the world we know today. So, as you take a final look at the Silk Road, remember that it wasn't just a line on a map. It was a living, breathing entity, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to dream, to explore, and to connect. It's a story that continues to inspire, a reminder that the journey is just as important as the destination. And while the road ahead may be uncertain, the legacy of the Silk Road offers a guiding light, a beacon of possibility in a world that is ever more interconnected. As you close the book on this ancient highway, take with you the lessons it offers. Embrace the unknown, cherish the journey, and never underestimate the power of a well-placed camel. After all, the Silk Road was more than just a path through the sand. It was a bridge between worlds, a symbol of the enduring power of human connection. And who knows, perhaps the next great adventure lies just over the horizon, waiting for those bold enough to take the first step. In the autumn of 1520, when being an Ottoman sultan was less about ruling and more about surviving your family, a 26-year-old with a keen eye for leadership and a dodgy haircut ascended the throne. Meet Suleiman, who would soon earn the moniker, the Magnificent, a title that admittedly sounds like it belongs to a Vegas magician. But in this case, it undersells his charisma and ambition. The Ottoman Empire was already the heavyweight champion of the Mediterranean, flexing its muscles from the gates of Vienna to the sandy shores of the Arabian Peninsula. And young Suleiman was about to make sure that not only would the empire stay on top, but it would also redefine what on top even meant. Now, there's something you should know about royal succession in the Ottoman court. It was less Game of Thrones and more Hunger Games. Brothers turned into rivals, with the last one standing getting the crown, and more importantly, keeping his head. Suleiman had the advantage of being the only surviving son of Selim I, known as Selim the Grim, because let's face it, he wasn't winning any Father of the Year awards. Selim liked his coffee black and his enemies. Well, as history shows, he preferred them not breathing. Suleiman's ascent was as surprising as a cat meme going viral. While he was born in 1494 in Trabzon, a city that was then as obscure as it is today, his early life was a cocktail of military training and studying the arts. He developed a fascination with Alexander the Great. This wasn't just a teenage phase. He took it to heart, seeing himself as a kind of 16th century remix of the Macedonian conqueror. His education was top-notch. He was well-versed in history, science, literature, and, of course, the subtle art of palace intrigue. After all, when failure in your family means a one-way trip to the executioner's block, you tend to learn fast. Upon his father's death, Suleiman was in Manisa, a city in western Anatolia, serving as a provincial governor. He got the news via a messenger who probably broke all the medieval speed limits to deliver it. Suleiman didn't waste time. He headed to Constantinople, the empire's glittering capital, to claim his throne. But getting there was only half the battle. The real test was keeping the seat warm while a horde of power-hungry viziers circled like vultures. To solidify his rule, Suleiman knew he had to play it smart. He began by executing two of his father's closest advisors. A definite statement piece, though not one you'd find in better homes and gardens. This ruthless move sent a clear message. The new sultan wasn't here to play nice. He wasn't just about eliminating threats, though. He was also about building alliances. He surrounded himself with a cadre of loyal and brilliant advisors, the most famous being Pargali Ibrahim Pasha, a man whose rise from slave to Grand Vizier could fill its own Netflix series. Suleiman also had a knack for charm. He made a point to be seen as a just ruler, one who valued the welfare of his people. He cut taxes, commissioned public works, and improved the legal system. This wasn't just governance, it was brand management. His subjects began to see him as Kanuni, the lawgiver, a title that, while lacking the pizzazz of the Magnificent, resonated more practically with the everyday Ottoman. His early years were marked by consolidating power internally and setting the stage for external expansion. And expand he did. Under his reign, the empire would stretch further than ever before, reaching into the heart of Europe, and deep into the Middle East. But in these formative years, Suleiman focused on securing his borders and fortifying his rule. He had the foresight to understand that an empire is only as strong as its foundation. So he cemented his authority at home before unleashing his ambitions abroad. Suleiman's rise was rapid, but it wasn't just luck or lineage that propelled him. He had the political acumen of a seasoned diplomat and the decisiveness of a military general. His early moves on the chessboard of Ottoman politics were bold and calculated, and they laid the groundwork for an era that would be remembered as the zenith of the empire's power. In short, he was crafting a legacy that would endure long after the dust settled and the history books were written. But before that, he needed to navigate the treacherous waters of Ottoman politics, where every misstep could be your last. And so, with his power base secure and his advisors in tow, Suleiman turned his gaze outward, ready to prove that he wasn't just another sultan warming the throne for a few years. He was the real deal, and nothing says, I mean business, quite like a military campaign. Now, if you thought Ottoman military endeavors were like a medieval version of Risk, think again. They were more akin to a real-life chess match, played on a grand scale with real lives and real stakes. The first move on this grand chessboard, the siege of Rhodes in 1522. Rhodes was not just any island. It was a fortified gem in the Aegean Sea, controlled by the Knights Hospitaller, a group with more armor than a Renaissance fair, and a penchant for making life difficult for the Ottomans. Suleiman, however, didn't just see a nuisance. He saw an opportunity. Taking Rhodes would send a clear message. The Ottoman Empire was not only here to stay, but here to expand. So, in June 1522, Suleiman launched a campaign that would redefine siege warfare. Picture this: 400 ships, 100,000 men, and enough artillery to make sure the knights knew he wasn't there for a friendly chat. The siege was less about storming the walls and more about who could outlast who. The knights were seasoned defenders, but Suleiman's forces had something they didn't: a state-of-the-art artillery park. We're talking cannons so large they made the walls tremble like a cat near a vacuum cleaner. For 5 long months, the Ottomans bombarded Rhodes, turning the siege into a grueling test of endurance. But it wasn't just brute force that won the day. Suleiman had a knack for diplomacy as well. When the knights were finally ready to talk terms, Suleiman offered them a deal that was surprisingly generous. They could leave with their lives and treasures intact, and in exchange, Rhodes would fly the Ottoman flag. It was a move that showcased Suleiman's strategic acumen. He knew that sometimes winning hearts was as important as winning battles. With Rhodes under his belt, Suleiman had secured the Aegean Sea, tightening his grip on the Mediterranean trade routes and setting the stage for future conquests. Now, if Rhodes was a game of siege warfare, the Battle of Mohawks in 1526 was a masterclass in battlefield tactics. The Kingdom of Hungary, led by King Louis Roman II, was a thorn in the Ottoman side. Situated at the crossroads of Europe, Hungary was like the moat protecting the Holy Roman Empire. Suleiman, ever the strategist, decided it was time to breach that moat. On August 29, 1526, under a sky that probably foreshadowed the impending doom, the Ottomans met the Hungarians on the fields of Mohawks. This wasn't just a battle, it was a demonstration of military evolution. The Hungarian forces, numbering around 25,000, faced the Ottoman army, which boasted nearly twice that number. But it wasn't just about the numbers, it was about the tools. The Ottomans had embraced gunpowder technology like a kid in a candy store, and their artillery was the star of the show. The battle itself was over in a flash. 2 hours, give or take. The Hungarian cavalry, charging heroically like something out of a medieval epic, found themselves outmatched by Ottoman cannons. It was a classic case of don't bring a horse to a cannon fight. The Ottoman artillery decimated the Hungarian ranks, and the battlefield became a testament to the brutal efficiency of modern warfare. King Louis Roman II met a watery end as he fled the field, drowning in a nearby river, which added a tragic note to the Hungarian defeat. The consequences of Mohawks were monumental. With Hungary effectively leaderless, Suleiman had opened the door to Central Europe, a door he intended to walk through with military boots. The victory sent shockwaves through the continent, and the myth of Suleiman as an unstoppable force began to solidify. But while the legends painted him as a warrior king, The reality was more nuanced. Suleiman was a ruler who understood that empires were built on the balance of power, diplomacy, and yes, the occasional cannonball. These campaigns highlighted Suleiman's dual nature, the warrior and the statesman, the conqueror and the diplomat. He wasn't just expanding the Ottoman Empire, he was redefining its power and influence on the world stage. And while the romantic tales of his conquests make for thrilling stories, the reality was that each victory came with its own set of challenges and consequences. Suleiman was as much a master of managing these as he was of wielding a sword. His reign was far from over, and the world was about to see just how far his ambitions could reach. But for now, his empire was expanding, his reputation was growing, and history was watching. With the Ottoman Empire's borders bulging like a well-fed python, Suleiman the Magnificent could have easily rested on his laurels, basking in the glory of his battlefield achievements. But no, our ambitious sultan had grander plans than just being remembered as a conqueror. He wanted an empire that wasn't just big, but also functional, a place where people could live, work, and most importantly, pay taxes without feeling like they were funding his latest military escapade. So, he rolled up his sleeves and got to work on his domestic policies, diving into what we might call how to run a superpower 101. Suleiman's legal reforms were nothing short of revolutionary for the 16th century. He was keenly aware that an empire wasn't just held together by swords and cannons, but by the rule of law. Enter the canon laws, a set of secular regulations that complemented the existing Sharia law. Now, don't let the word secular fool you into thinking this was some kind of medieval separation of church and state. This was more about pragmatism than ideology. Ottoman society was a tapestry of different cultures and religions, and Suleiman needed a legal framework that could bind them together without unraveling at the seams. The canon laws covered everything from criminal justice to taxation and land ownership. And while it might not sound as exciting as a cavalry charge, it was this legal overhaul that earned Suleiman the moniker Kanuni, or lawgiver. Spoiler, he wasn't handing out parking tickets or setting speed limits for caravans. Instead, he was crafting laws that would govern a multi-ethnic empire, ensuring that justice wasn't just swift, but also fair, or at least as fair as a 16th century empire could manage. The idea was simple. A stable legal system would lead to a stable society, which in turn would fill the imperial coffers. And let's be honest, nothing says successful reign quite like a healthy treasury. But Suleiman's ambition didn't stop at the courtroom door. He had a flair for the finer things in life, and his patronage of the arts and architecture was nothing short of legendary. After all, why conquer a city if you can't build a snazzy mosque in it? Suleiman saw architecture as a way to leave an indelible mark on the world, a testament to his reign that would last long after the last Ottoman soldier had marched home. Enter Mimar Sinan, the architect extraordinaire whose blueprints would transform the skylines of the empire. Sinan, a man whose genius was only rivaled by his work ethic, was the Sultan's go-to guy for all things architectural. Under Suleiman's patronage, Sinan designed more than 300 structures, including mosques, bridges, and public baths. The crown jewel of his work, the Suleimani Mosque in Istanbul, completed in 1557. This wasn't just any mosque. It was a symbol of Ottoman grandeur, a place where the spiritual and the temporal met under one glorious dome. The mosque complex wasn't just about worship. It included schools, a hospital, and even a soup kitchen, showing that Suleiman's vision was as much about public welfare as it was about piety. But let's insert a splash of reality into this romanticized canvas. While the arts flourished and the empire's cities gleamed with new buildings, the costs were astronomical. The Suleimani Mosque alone cost a staggering amount of money and resources, enough to feed entire provinces for years. And while the empire's wealth was considerable, fueled by trade routes that stretched from Europe to Asia, managing such an economic behemoth was no small feat. Suleiman's domestic policies required a delicate balance of revenue and expenditure, a juggling act that left little room for error. Yet, despite the economic strain, the Sultan's investment in architecture and culture paid off in ways that transcended mere aesthetics. These public works served as a form of soft power, cementing Suleiman's legacy as a patron of the arts and a champion of cultural fusion. They bolstered the idea of an Ottoman identity that was inclusive and diverse, a reflection of the empire's vast and varied populace. It was a masterstroke of statesmanship, ensuring that even as the empire's borders expanded, its cultural heart remained vibrant and unified. Of course, not everyone was a fan of Suleiman's grand vision. Critics argued that his focus on legal and cultural reforms diverted attention from pressing military matters, leaving the empire vulnerable to external threats. And while they had a point, Suleiman understood that an empire could only be as strong as its foundation. His policies were about more than just maintaining power. They were about creating a legacy that would endure long after his reign had ended. As the years rolled on, Suleiman continued to refine his domestic policies, always with an eye on the bigger picture. He knew that true power wasn't just about the size of his army or the reach of his empire. It was about the strength of his institutions and the prosperity of his people. And while the legends of his conquests make for thrilling stories, it's his domestic achievements that truly defined his reign. They were the quiet victories that ensured the Ottoman Empire wasn't just a fleeting empire, but a lasting one. In the end, Suleiman's domestic policies were about more than just governance. They were about vision. A vision of an empire that was as much a beacon of culture and justice as it was a bastion of power. And while the Sultan's military exploits may have grabbed the headlines, it was his legal reforms and cultural patronage that laid the groundwork for an empire that would endure for centuries. As history shows, real power isn't just about conquering lands. It's about conquering hearts and minds. And in that regard, Suleiman the Magnificent was truly in a league of his own. But what was the beating heart behind Suleiman's empire? The man himself, of course, but also the personal and political drama swirling around him like a Mediterranean tempest. Now, if you think the Ottoman court was all about solemn meetings and stern-faced advisors, think again. It was more of a Shakespearean stage, complete with romance, intrigue, and betrayal. Enter Ranavalona, the woman who would become the Sultan's queen and rewrite the script of Ottoman history. Ranavalona. The name alone conjures images of a femme fatale, and while her life might not have been penned by a screenwriter, it was filled with plot twists worthy of a primetime drama. Born around 1505 in what is today Ukraine, Ranavalona started life as Alexandra Lisowska, a far cry from the opulent world she would later inhabit. Captured by Crimean Tartars and sold into slavery, she ended up in the Topkapi Palace harem. Hardly an ideal start, but one that would lead to her becoming one of the most powerful women of her time. Now, let's pause for a moment to address the elephant in the room, the harem. Forget the myths of constant revelry and endless luxury. The reality, it was more of a political chessboard than a sultan's paradise. The harem was a place where alliances were forged and rivalries festered, where every move could make or break a future. It wasn't a free-for-all of indulgence. It was a high-stakes game of social survival. Ranavalona, with her quick wit and keen intellect, quickly rose through the ranks of this labyrinthine world. Her charm was not just skin-deep. She possessed the strategic mind of a seasoned diplomat. Suleiman was captivated, and their relationship blossomed into something extraordinary. He even broke with tradition by marrying her, a move that sent shockwaves through the Ottoman court. This wasn't just a royal wedding. It was a seismic shift in power dynamics. Ranavalona wasn't just a consort. She became Hurrem Sultan, his legal wife, and a formidable political partner. This unconventional romance didn't sit well with everyone. The Ottoman elite were as scandalized as a Victorian aunt at a rock concert. Marrying a former slave was akin to rewriting the rules of the game, and in a world steeped in tradition, that was tantamount to rebellion. Yet, Suleiman and Ranavalona were a power couple in every sense, and together they reshaped the very fabric of the court. Ranavalona wielded her influence with the precision of a surgeon. She was a patron of the arts and a shrewd political player. Her involvement in state affairs wasn't just tolerated, it was instrumental. She participated in diplomatic correspondence, even engaging with European monarchs, and her keen insight helped Suleiman navigate the turbulent waters of international politics. Her influence was so profound that she gained the nickname Hayski, a title reserved for the Sultan's favorite consort. But with great power comes great. Well, you know the rest. Court intrigue was as inevitable as taxes, and Roxolana's rise was met with more than a few arched eyebrows and a fair share of daggers, sometimes metaphorical, sometimes not. Her relationship with Suleiman's friend and Grand Vizier, Ibrahim Pasha, was particularly fraught. Ibrahim, once a slave himself and now a political powerhouse, was a trusted advisor to Suleiman. But Roxolana saw him as a rival, and in the zero-sum game of court politics, there was little room for compromise. In 1536, Ibrahim met a grim fate, executed on Suleiman's orders. The details remain shrouded in mystery, but Roxolana's influence is often cited as a catalyst. Was she the Lady Macbeth of the Ottoman Empire, or simply a woman protecting her family's future? The truth, as always, is likely somewhere in the murky middle. Roxolana's story doesn't end there. She bore Suleiman multiple children, including his successor, Selim II. This was more than just a happy family photo. It was a strategic move to ensure her lineage's future. In the fiercely competitive world of Ottoman succession, securing the throne for her son was the ultimate power play. The stakes were high, and Roxolana played the game with the cunning of a chess grandmaster. Her influence extended beyond the palace walls. She initiated public works, including the construction of mosques and charitable foundations. This wasn't just philanthropy, it was brand management. By aligning her name with these projects, Roxolana cultivated an image of piety and benevolence, ensuring her legacy would endure long after her time in the spotlight had faded. But let's not romanticize the reality. Roxolana's rise to power was fraught with peril and sacrifice. The court was a minefield, and every step could have been her last. Her story is a testament to the complexity of human ambition and the intricate dance of power. It's easy to paint her as either a villain or a victim, but the truth is she was a survivor, navigating a world that was as treacherous as it was opulent. Speaking of opulence, the Ottoman court was a spectacle of wealth and tradition. The palaces were adorned with treasures from across the empire, a testament to its vast reach and influence. The Topkapi Palace, with its sprawling gardens and intricate architecture, was not just a residence, but a microcosm of the empire itself, a place where politics, culture, and power intersected in a dazzling display. But let's not get lost in the grandeur. Beneath the glittering surface, the court was a hotbed of tension and intrigue. Alliances were as fragile as the porcelain teacups that graced the Sultan's table, and betrayals were as common as the morning call to prayer. Every smile concealed a dagger, every gesture a potential power play. It was a world where trust was scarce, and loyalty was often a matter of convenience. The customs of the Ottoman court were as intricate as its politics. Ceremonies and rituals were meticulously observed, each one a reflection of the empire's rich tapestry of cultures. From the elaborate feasts to the solemn processions, every event was a statement of power and prestige. Yet, beneath the pageantry lay a complex web of social hierarchies and unspoken rules, where every action was scrutinized, and every misstep could be your last. In this world of opulence and intrigue, Suleiman and Roxolana carved out a legacy that would endure long after their reign had ended. Their story is one of ambition, love, and survival, a testament to the human spirit's capacity for both greatness and folly. It's a reminder that history isn't just a series of dates and events, but a tapestry of human experiences, each thread woven with the complexity of life itself. So, as we peel back the layers of Suleiman's personal life, we find a story that is as intricate as the empire he ruled. A story where love and power intertwine, where ambition and survival are two sides of the same coin. It's a tale that continues to captivate, a reminder that even in the corridors of power, the human heart beats with the same hopes and fears, dreams and desires that have driven history since time immemorial. And while Suleiman's military exploits and legal reforms may have defined his reign, it's his personal story that adds the color and depth to his legacy. The man behind the title was as complex and multifaceted as the empire he ruled, and as we continue to explore his life, we find not just a sultan but a man whose life was a testament to the power of love, ambition, and the indomitable human spirit. Let's hold that thought, because there's more to uncover, and the story of Suleiman the Magnificent is far from over. As the curtain falls on the theatrical saga of Suleiman the Magnificent, we find ourselves grappling with the legacy he left behind, a mosaic of triumphs, trials, and tantalizing tales that wove the very fabric of the Ottoman Empire's zenith. His reign was a high-wire act of ambition and artistry, a balancing act that kept the empire sprawling from the gates of Vienna to the sands of Arabia. But what happens when the spotlight dims and the audience disperses? What becomes of a giant's shadow when he exits the stage? Suleiman's legacy is a two-edged sword, gleaming with the brilliance of his achievements, yet shadowed by the burdens it placed on his successors. His conquests and reforms were the stuff of legends, but they were also a Pandora's box of challenges for those who followed. The empire he left behind was a colossal beast, a leviathan that required constant feeding, or in this case, managing. Picture this, an empire with a population of over 30 million, stretching across 3 continents, held together by a patchwork of cultures, religions, and languages. It's the kind of diversity that makes a modern-day UN conference look like a small-town council meeting. For the sultans who followed, maintaining such a vast realm was akin to juggling flaming swords while riding a unicycle. The economic machine that Suleiman had fine-tuned faced the pressures of maintaining an overextended empire. His successors dealt with inflation, driven by the influx of New World silver that devalued Ottoman currency faster than a Black Friday sale. The empire's sheer size made it vulnerable to the inefficiencies of communication and governance, with provinces often feeling more like distant relatives than immediate family. Suleiman's military expansions, while dazzling on the map, also posed a dilemma. His successors discovered that holding onto these territories was like trying to keep a houseplant alive. It required constant attention, and sometimes, no matter what you did, things just wilted. The Battle of Lepanto in 1571, just 5 years after Suleiman's death, was a wake-up call that the Ottoman navy wasn't invincible. The Holy League's victory was a reminder that the empire's maritime dominance was not a given, and it shattered the myth of Ottoman invulnerability. Internally, Suleiman's legal reforms and cultural patronage cast a long shadow. His vision of a unified legal system was a noble endeavor, but it also set a high bar for governance. His successors, lacking his charisma and strategic acumen, struggled to uphold the canon laws with the same effectiveness. The intricate dance of diplomacy that Suleiman mastered became a stumbling waltz for those who followed. The empire faced growing pains that were less about territorial acquisition and more about managing what was already held. Yet, even as the empire's boundaries wavered, Suleiman's vision endured in ways he probably never anticipated. His patronage of the arts and architecture left a cultural legacy that outlived the shifting political sands. The mosques, bridges, and public works initiated under his reign became enduring symbols of Ottoman innovation and grandeur. The Suleimani Mosque still stands as a testament to a time when art and empire were intertwined, a period when the call to prayer echoed through marble halls as a reminder of Suleiman's ambition. Fast forward to modern Turkey, and you'll find a nation still wrestling with its Ottoman past. The legacy of Suleiman and the empire he helped build is a complex tapestry, rich in history yet fraught with contradiction. Turkey's relationship with its Ottoman heritage is like that of a teenager with an embarrassing family photo album, proud yet cautious, aware of the grand narratives but wary of the less savory chapters. For some, the Ottoman era is a source of national pride, a golden age of cultural and military prowess. For others, it's a period marked by imperial overreach and eventual decline. This duality is reflected in Turkey's politics, where references to the Ottoman past can be both a rallying cry and a contentious debate. The nation's leaders often evoke the empire's grandeur, yet they also grapple with its legacies of ethnic tension and religious diversity. Suleiman's reign is a reminder that history is rarely black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of human endeavor, filled with moments of brilliance and folly, where every decision casts ripples across the ages. His ambitions stretched the Ottoman Empire to its limits, and while it shone brightly under his rule, the afterglow was not without its shadows. His legacy is one of complexity, a testament to the challenges of leadership and the enduring impact of vision. In the grand tapestry of history, Suleiman is not just a sultan, but a symbol, a reminder of the heights that can be reached through ambition, the pitfalls of power, and the enduring allure of a legacy that continues to captivate and confound. As we close the chapter on Suleiman the Magnificent, we're left with a story that is as much about human nature as it is about history. A tale of dreams and realities, ambition and consequence, woven together in the intricate dance of time. In the aftermath of Alexander the Great's demise, the world of 323 BCE was a smorgasbord of chaos, intrigue, and potential land grabs that would make a modern property developer weep with envy. Enter Seleucus I Nikeda, the man who would soon carve out his own empire from the vast territories left behind by his legendary boss. This wasn't just any old empire building. This was empire building with a side of Hellenistic flair and a sprinkle of opportunistic backstabbing. Seleucus wasn't just some random guy who lucked into a kingdom. Born around 358 BCE, he was one of Alexander's trusted generals, part of the Macedonian clique that conquered half the known world before most of them had hit 30. Talk about overachievers. But when Alexander, who could arguably be called the Beyoncé of ancient military leaders, died without a clear succession plan, the empire splintered like a dry breadstick. This kicked off a period known as the Wars of the Diadochi, or, for those not fluent in ancient Greek, the successors. The Diadochi were a feisty bunch, playing a real-life game of thrones where territory was the prize and alliances were more temporary than a celebrity marriage. Seleucus was no slouch in this high-stakes game. He initially took a backseat, aligning himself with the more powerful players like Perdiccas, the regent for Alexander's half-brother, Philip Roman III. But when Perdiccas became a little too ambitious, crossing the Nile in an ill-fated campaign against Ptolemy, Seleucus did what any sensible general would do. He switched sides faster than you can say, mutiny. Following Perdiccas' assassination in 321 BCE, Seleucus was rewarded for his timely betrayal with the governorship of Babylon. It was like being handed the keys to a Ferrari because you helped someone out of a fender bender. Now, Babylon wasn't just a random dot on the map. It was a wealthy, strategically crucial center that had been a jewel in the crown of the Persian Empire long before Alexander's conquests. As satrap, or governor, Seleucus controlled a region that was essentially the ancient equivalent of Silicon Valley, an economic powerhouse with cultural flair. But unlike California's tech executives, Seleucus had to contend with armies at his doorstep, not just quarterly earnings reports. The early days of his reign were anything but smooth. In 316 BCE, Antigonus Monophthalmus, yes, the one-eyed, because apparently having a catchy nickname was as important then as it is now decided he wanted Babylon for himself. Seleucus, not keen on being dethroned, fled to Egypt to buddy up with Ptolemy, another of Alexander's former generals who was busy establishing his own realm. In a move that would make any reality TV producer proud, Ptolemy and Seleucus teamed up to oust Antigonus from Babylon. By 312 BCE, Seleucus was back in Babylon, and this time he wasn't just playing defense. He embarked on a campaign to expand his control eastward. This was no small feat. We're talking about a journey that spanned thousands of miles through the rugged terrain of Iran and Afghanistan into the Indus Valley. And he wasn't just strolling through these lands, he was conquering them. By 305 BCE, he had taken enough territory to call himself king. Not bad for a guy who, just a few years earlier, was essentially couch-surfing in Egypt. The founding of the Seleucid Empire wasn't just about military might, though. Seleucus embraced the Hellenistic culture that Alexander had spread like olive oil on a Greek salad. He established cities, Seleucia on the Tigris being the most notable, that became hubs of Greek culture and learning. The empire stretched from the Mediterranean to the borders of India, a vast multicultural mosaic where Greek, Persian, and Indian influences blended. It was like the ancient world's answer to a global city, minus the artisanal coffee shops. Seleucus's rise to power is often romanticized as a tale of brilliant strategy and battlefield heroics, and sure, there's some truth to that. But let's not forget the messy reality. It was a time when alliances shifted like desert sands, and betrayal was as common as a morning cup of wine. Seleucus wasn't just a military genius. He was a master of political maneuvering, leveraging friendships and rivalries to build his empire. In the grand sweep of history, the Seleucid Empire might not always get top billing, often overshadowed by the likes of Rome or Egypt. But its story is a testament to the chaotic, unpredictable nature of power. In a world where the only constant was change, Seleucus thrived. He took a fragmented world and stitched together a patchwork of cultures and territories, creating a legacy that would influence the ancient world long after his death in 281 BCE. So, while Alexander might have lit the fuse, it was Seleucus who kept the fire burning, navigating the post-Alexandrian chaos with a mix of cunning, courage, and a touch of opportunistic flair that would make any modern entrepreneur proud. Seleucus, having laid the groundwork for his empire, didn't just kick back with a goblet of wine and admire his handiwork. He was just getting started. With Babylon firmly under his control, he now turned his attention to the ambitious task of territorial expansion, eyeing lands that would stretch the Seleucid Empire from the Mediterranean to the fringes of India. This wasn't just a map-making exercise. It was a full-on real estate binge that would make even the most aggressive modern land developers look like hobbyists. The strategy was simple, if not a bit audacious: consolidate and conquer. Seleucus looked westward to Anatolia, a land of rugged mountains, fertile plains, and conveniently a patchwork of smaller kingdoms just ripe for the picking. Think of it as the ancient world's version of a fixer-upper. Plenty of potential if you were willing to put in the work. Seleucus's son, Antiochus I, took on the task of securing these lands, employing a mix of military might and diplomacy. By 281 BCE, after a series of campaigns that would have made any war strategist proud, Anatolia became a vital part of the Seleucid tapestry. But Seleucus wasn't about to be boxed in by the Mediterranean's blue embrace. To the east lay the sprawling lands of Persia and beyond, territories that had been part of Alexander's empire, but were now slipping into autonomy like rebellious teenagers testing curfews. The Seleucid strategy here involved more than just swords and spears. It was about weaving a cultural and economic tapestry that blended Greek and local traditions. Cities like Seleucia on the Tigris and Antioch became bustling hubs of Hellenistic culture, where Persian satraps and Greek philosophers could share a meal and maybe even a philosophical debate. This cultural fusion wasn't just a nice side effect. It was a deliberate tactic to maintain control over diverse populations. Yet, the romantic notion of a harmonious cultural mosaic glosses over the gritty truth. Ruling such a vast and diverse empire was about as easy as herding cats. The Seleucids had to deal with constant uprisings, rebellious satraps, and the perpetual threat of external invasions. There were Persians who weren't exactly thrilled about their new Greek overlords, and Indian territories that were less than eager to embrace Hellenistic culture. Managing this unwieldy empire required a mix of diplomacy, strategic marriages, and the occasional show of force. Seleucus and his successors had to juggle more than just military campaigns. They had to be part diplomat, part administrator, and part cultural ambassador. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Seleucid expansion was its economic underpinnings. This wasn't just about planting flags on new territories. It was about tapping into trade routes that crisscrossed Asia. The Silk Road, that legendary artery of commerce, became a lifeline for the Seleucids, linking the Mediterranean with the riches of the East. Spices, textiles, and precious metals flowed through their empire, turning cities like Seleucia into bustling centers of trade. The Seleucids weren't just warriors. They were savvy merchants who understood that wealth flowed along with goods and ideas. Of course, all this expansion came at a cost, both literal and figurative. Maintaining a vast empire required a robust military, and that didn't come cheap. Armies had to be fed, clothed, and paid, and the Seleucids were constantly on the lookout for new sources of revenue. Taxation became an art form, with local administrators tasked with squeezing every last drachma out of their territories. This economic pressure was a double-edged sword. It funded the empire's ambitions, but also sowed seeds of discontent among the populace. As the Seleucids pushed towards India, they encountered the mighty Mauryan Empire, ruled by Chandragupta Maurya. This wasn't a mere skirmish on the fringes of the empire. This was a clash with one of the most formidable powers of the ancient world. Rather than waste resources on a protracted conflict, Seleucus opted for diplomacy, a move that showcased his pragmatic streak. In a savvy political maneuver, a treaty was struck, exchanging territories for a matrimonial alliance. Seleucus's daughter was married into the Mauryan dynasty, sealing a peace that was as much about mutual benefit as it was about avoiding costly warfare. The Seleucid Empire, like any great power, was a blend of vision and volatility, grand designs and gritty realities. For all the romanticism of its Hellenistic culture, the Seleucids faced a constant battle to maintain their sprawling dominion. They were masters of adaptation, blending cultures, and forging alliances when outright conquest wasn't feasible. Yet, for all their cunning, they couldn't escape the inherent instability of an empire built on such diverse foundations. In the grand theater of ancient history, the Seleucid Empire played a complex, multifaceted role. It was a testament to the power of ambition, the allure of cultural exchange, and the harsh realities of ruling over an empire that was as fragmented as it was vast. As we delve deeper into their story, we find that the Seleucids were more than just conquerors. They were architects of an ancient world that was as interconnected as it was contentious. And as history would later show, even the most formidable empires are but temporary custodians of power, leaving behind legacies that are as instructive as they are inspiring. For the Seleucids, cultural exchange wasn't just a side project, it was a survival strategy. Imagine trying to manage an empire where your subjects spoke more languages than a polyglot convention. The Seleucid Empire was like a giant ancient blender, mixing Greek and Eastern cultures into a smoothie of surprising flavors. But let's get one thing straight. Not everyone was lining up to wear a toga and spout Plato's philosophies. The idea that the entire ancient world was eager to become a knockoff Athens is one of history's great myths. Sure, Greek culture had its perks. Who wouldn't want to lounge around in a symposium debating philosophy while sipping on wine? But the reality was more complicated. For starters, the Seleucids had to convince their diverse populations that this cultural mashup was a great idea. Picture a Persian satrap who'd been happily worshipping Ahura Mazda for generations suddenly being asked to throw some Zeus worship into the mix. It wasn't exactly a seamless transition. While Greek became the lingua franca of the elite, locals often held onto their native languages, like a vintage coat that never goes out of style. Just because Greek was in vogue didn't mean everyone was rushing to enroll in language classes. The Seleucids were savvy enough to realize that imposing Greek culture wholesale would be about as popular as a wet toga contest. Instead, they took a more flexible approach, allowing local customs to continue alongside Greek practices. It was the ancient version of you do you. The cities founded by Seleucus and his successors, such as Antioch and Seleucia, became melting pots where Greek and Eastern traditions coexisted. These cities were buzzing with intellectual cross-pollination. Picture bustling markets where Greek philosophers could haggle over the price of Persian rugs while debating the nature of existence with an Indian sage. The blending of art, architecture, and religion created a unique Hellenistic culture that was neither purely Greek nor entirely Eastern. It was an empire in a constant state of cultural negotiation, a testament to the Seleucids' diplomatic finesse. However, like any good negotiation, there were bumps along the road. Some regions embraced Hellenistic culture with open arms, while others grumbled about these foreign influences. In Judea, for example, the introduction of Greek customs sparked tension, culminating in the Maccabean revolt around 167 BCE. The Seleucids learned the hard way that not everyone appreciated a gymnasium popping up next to their local temple. It was a classic case of cultural overreach, a reminder that blending traditions was easier said than done. Economically, this cultural exchange was a goldmine. The Seleucids capitalized on trade routes that connected the Mediterranean with Asia's riches. They weren't just spreading Greek culture for the sake of it. They were creating a network that facilitated trade and economic growth. Think of it as ancient globalization, with silk and spices flowing alongside ideas and philosophies. The Silk Road became a bustling artery of commerce, turning cities into thriving marketplaces where Greek merchants could haggle over the finest goods from India and China. But let's not romanticize this too much. The Seleucid Empire wasn't a utopian cultural melting pot. The integration of Greek and Eastern cultures was as messy as a toga party gone awry. There were clashes, rebellions, and moments when the whole cultural experiment seemed on the verge of unraveling. Yet, the Seleucids were pragmatists at heart. They knew that to maintain control over their sprawling empire, they had to adapt. Embracing cultural diversity wasn't just a nice idea. It was a political necessity. The Seleucids' approach to culture can teach us a lot about the complexities of power. They understood that the real strength of their empire lay not just in military might, but in the ability to foster connections between diverse peoples. While the romantic notion of a Hellenistic utopia glosses over the gritty realities, it's a testament to the Seleucids' ingenuity that they managed to hold their empire together for as long as they did. In the grand tapestry of history, the Seleucid Empire is a vivid reminder that cultural exchange is as challenging as it is rewarding. It's a story of ambition, adaptation, and the occasional cultural faux pas. As we delve deeper into their tale, we find that the Seleucids weren't just conquerors. They were architects of a multicultural world that was as complicated and contentious as it was fascinating. Every city they built, every policy they enacted, was a step towards creating an empire that could stand the test of time, or at least until the next rebellion. While the Seleucid Empire's blend of cultures was a political necessity, it also gave rise to some of the messiest internal strife imaginable. Picture a family feud that makes your last Thanksgiving spat look like a friendly chat over turkey. The Seleucid dynasty was riddled with enough intrigue and betrayal to fill an entire season of a soap opera. And just like in any good drama, the stakes were life and death, with a side of fiscal angst. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of Seleucid internal politics, starting with political assassinations, which were practically a rite of passage for anyone with imperial aspirations. Antiochus Roman III, known as Antiochus the Great, was perhaps the last Seleucid king to really hold it together. His reign, from 222 to 187 BCE, was a high-wire act of military campaigns and diplomatic juggling. But when he tried to push his empire's boundaries into Greece, he met Rome, the ancient world's equivalent of a buzzsaw. After a series of defeats, he signed the Treaty of Apamea in 188 BCE, which handed over a sizable chunk of his army, a hefty war indemnity of 15,000 talents of silver. That's about 450,000 pounds, or over 200,000 kilograms, for those keeping score, and his youngest son as a hostage. Ouch. Antiochus Roman III's death in 187 BCE marked the end of an era of relative stability. His successors, unfortunately, didn't inherit his knack for managing an empire the size of a small continent. Instead, they seemed more interested in stabbing each other in the back than in actually governing. Case in point, Seleucus Roman IV, Antiochus Roman III's son, who ruled from 187 to 175 BCE. He tried to stabilize the empire's finances, but his reign was cut short by a classic palace coup. He was assassinated by his own finance minister, Heliodorus, who apparently decided that balancing the books was easier without a king breathing down his neck. And then there's Antiochus Roman IV, also known as Antiochus Epiphanes, God manifest. Modesty clearly wasn't his strong suit. He seized the throne in 175 BCE, and his reign was, shall we say, tumultuous. Antiochus Roman IV was the kind of ruler who thought he could solve any problem by throwing a festival or two. He even tried to raid a temple treasury to fund his campaigns, which, unsurprisingly, didn't go over well with the locals. His attempts to Hellenize the Jewish population led to the aforementioned Maccabean revolt. Not exactly a masterclass in cultural sensitivity. Yet, Antiochus Roman IV antics paled in comparison to the financial woes that plagued the empire. Running an empire was expensive, and the Seleucids were no strangers to fiscal crises. The cost of maintaining a standing army, fortifying cities, and funding lavish court ceremonies ate into the treasury faster than you can say deficit. Taxation was the go-to solution, but it was a delicate balance. Too little, and the empire couldn't pay its soldiers. Too much, and you'd have a full-scale rebellion on your hands. The Seleucids often found themselves caught between a rock and a hard place, and sometimes the rock was a bit too eager to crush them. Their economic troubles were exacerbated by the fact that the empire's trade routes, once a source of immense wealth, were becoming less reliable. The Parthians, a rising power to the east, were more than happy to nibble away at Seleucid territories and cut off key trade routes. This wasn't just a matter of losing a few provinces. It was a hemorrhage of resources that the empire could ill afford. Every lost territory was a blow to the Seleucid economy, a reminder that their vast empire was increasingly difficult to defend. The internal strife and economic challenges were symptoms of a larger problem, the sheer unwieldiness of the Seleucid Empire. It was a sprawling patchwork of cultures, languages, and political systems, and keeping it all together required a level of administrative wizardry that few of its rulers possessed. The central authority weakened with each successive ruler, as power struggles and fiscal mismanagement took their toll. In this context, the Seleucid Empire's struggles become a cautionary tale about the limits of power. They illustrate that even the most ambitious and culturally rich empires can crumble under the weight of their own complexity. The Seleucid story is a mix of high drama and harsh realities, where the allure of a multicultural empire was constantly undermined by the practicalities of governance. As the empire began to unravel, it wasn't just the grand political machinations that highlighted its decline. The day-to-day governance, or lack thereof, played an equally crucial role. Local governors, or satraps, often acted more like independent rulers than loyal administrators. Their loyalty was often a matter of convenience rather than genuine allegiance to the Seleucid house. These satraps were the kind of crafty operators who'd switch sides faster than a politician at a campaign rally if it suited their interests. The Seleucids' reliance on these local power brokers was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it allowed them to exert control over vast territories without having to micromanage every province. On the other, it meant that the central government was perpetually at the mercy of these regional strongmen, whose agendas didn't always align with those of the empire. As the central authority weakened, these satraps became increasingly bold in asserting their independence, further fragmenting the empire. The Seleucid Empire's decline is a fascinating study in the fragility of power. It shows that the grand sweep of history is often shaped as much by mundane realities as by epic battles. The Seleucid story is a vivid reminder that even the most formidable empires can come undone, not just by external threats, but by the internal contradictions that lie at their heart. As we continue to unravel the tale of the Seleucid Empire, we see that its legacy is as much about the challenges of holding together a diverse and sprawling domain as it is about the grandeur of its cultural achievements. It's a story that resonates with modern audiences, offering insights into the complexities of power and the ever-present tension between ambition and reality. So buckle up, because the saga of the Seleucids is far from over, and the road ahead is just as bumpy as the one we've traveled so far. The Seleucid Empire's story might seem like a history lesson wrapped in chaos, but it's also a masterclass in overreach. Picture a bustling empire, stretching from the Mediterranean to the edges of India, held together by the sheer will of its rulers, and a patchwork of sometimes cooperative, sometimes rebellious satrapies. The Seleucids' rise was meteoric, but their fall was a slow unraveling, like a sweater with one too many loose threads. This is the tale of an empire that tried to do it all, and in doing so, stretched itself thinner than a Grecian toga. For starters, let's talk about legacy, the kind that lingers like an aftertaste long after the main course is gone. The Seleucids were champions of cultural fusion before it was cool. Their cities, like Antioch and Seleucia, were melting pots where East met West, a cocktail of Greek rationalism stirred with Eastern mysticism. They didn't just conquer territories, they seeded them with ideas, art, and architecture that would influence civilizations long after their empire crumbled. In a way, the Seleucid Empire was the original globalist project. Their mix of cultures laid the groundwork for the Silk Road, which became history's first superhighway of trade and ideas. Yet, the Seleucid legacy isn't just about cultural exchanges and grand cities. Their empire is a case study in the dangers of biting off more than you can chew. It's the story of a kingdom that wanted to be everything to everyone, and ended up being the cautionary tale ancient historians love to recount. The Seleucids remind us that ambition, while admirable, can lead to a collapse of epic proportions if not checked by practical governance and economic reality. Speaking of economics, the Seleucids knew how to throw a good party, but their fiscal management was a bit like playing dice with the gods, risky at best. Running an empire that vast required a steady stream of revenue, and when trade routes faltered or territories rebelled, the treasury felt the pinch. With every lost province, the empire's purse strings tightened, and it became increasingly clear that maintaining such a sprawling dominion required more than just military prowess. It needed cash, and lots of it. Their financial woes are a stark reminder that empires aren't just built on conquests, they're sustained by a balanced budget. The Seleucid tale also offers modern states a lesson in the art of governance. Centralized control might sound efficient, but in practice, it's like trying to herd cats with a whistle. The Seleucids relied heavily on local satraps to maintain order, yet these regional governors often acted like mini-monarchs, pursuing their own interests rather than the empire's. It's a cautionary tale of decentralized authority devolving into chaos, showing that without a strong, unifying leadership, even the most ambitious projects can fracture under their own complexity. But let's not forget the human element. The Seleucid story is peppered with colorful characters who, despite their flaws, left an indelible mark on history. From Seleucus I, who built the empire from the ashes of Alexander's conquests, to Antiochus Roman III, who tried to revive its fortunes, these figures remind us that history is driven by individuals as much as by ideas. Their ambitions, rivalries, and occasional blunders paint a picture of an era when the world was both larger and smaller, vast in its geography, yet intimately connected by the threads of commerce and culture. The Seleucid Empire's decline was a slow-motion train wreck that offers a sobering perspective on the limits of empire. As their power waned, so too did their ability to influence the regions they once controlled. Yet, even in retreat, their impact lingered. The cultural exchanges they fostered lived on in the cities and societies that followed, a testament to the enduring power of ideas over mere territorial control. In the grand sweep of history, Seleucids serve as a reminder that empires are as fragile as they are formidable. Their story is a blend of triumph and tragedy, innovation and inertia. It's a narrative that echoes through the ages, offering insights into the nature of power and the complex web of human ambition. The Seleucid Empire, with its blend of cultures and its ambitious reach, stands as a monument to the possibilities and perils of empire, a lesson as relevant today as it was over 2 millennia ago. As we wrap up this journey through the Seleucid saga, let's reflect on the echoes of their legacy. In a world that's increasingly interconnected, their story serves as both inspiration and warning. The Seleucids remind us that while cultural exchange can be a powerful force for unity, it requires careful navigation to avoid the pitfalls of overreach and discord. They were architects of a world that was both complex and contentious, a testament to the enduring challenge of managing diversity within a unified political framework. So, next time you ponder the rise and fall of empires, or the intricate dance of cultural exchange, spare a thought for the Seleucids. They were the original dreamers and schemers, the pioneers of a multicultural world that would shape the course of history long after their empire faded into the annals of history. Their legacy is a vivid reminder that while the players may change, the game of power remains as intricate and compelling as ever. The year is 1492, and as dawn's light cracks over the horizon, you're not exactly wrapped in the warm embrace of a cozy bed. No, you're on the deck of a creaky wooden ship, surrounded by the smell of salt and sweat. Morning rituals kick off with a prayer, because let's face it, with the kind of odds you're up against, divine intervention is about as reliable as your navigation tools. Speaking of which, let's talk gadgets. You're holding an astrolabe, a brass disc that looks more like a medieval frisbee than a tool of precision. If you've got a degree in math, or witchcraft, some might say, you can use it to measure the angle of the stars above the horizon. But in reality, a shift of a few degrees could mean the difference between hitting land and wandering the endless ocean. The compass, your other trusty instrument, is about the size of your palm. It points north most of the time, but thanks to magnetic variations, it sometimes feels like even the compass is on its own little adventure. Now, let's not romanticize this too much. The truth is, these tools were as unpredictable as a toddler's mood. Mariners often found themselves relying more on gut instinct and experience than on the supposed precision of their instruments. You could say they were navigating by a mix of science, art, and a healthy dose of luck. Before you dive into the business of the day, it's time for breakfast. Forget eggs and bacon. Think hardtack, a delightful delicacy that's basically a baked flour brick. This stuff is so tough, you'd be forgiven for mistaking it for a building material. But hey, it's got a shelf life that rivals Twinkies. You might wash it down with ale, because water turns suspect faster than a pirate eyeing up your cargo. With your stomach doing acrobatics over the hardtack, you ponder the cost of this whole seafaring affair. The ship you're on, not a leaky rowboat, but a full-fledged caravel, courtesy of some deep-pocketed investor, or maybe a very persuasive loan shark. Outfitting one of these wooden beasts could cost upwards of 2,000 ducats, a small fortune back then. And that's before you factor in the cost of provisions, which could easily run into the hundreds of ducats for a long voyage. Let's not forget the salaries of the crew, who are probably as eager to get paid as you are to see dry land again. Why take on such perilous and costly ventures, you ask? Well, this is the age of exploration, my friend. The promise of untold riches and new lands has a way of persuading folks to part with their coins. Plus, there's the not-so-small matter of national pride and the desire to plant your flag before the competition does. It's a high-stakes game of nautical poker, and you're all in. Your day is just getting started, and like any good sailor, you've got to keep the ship in shape. Maintenance is no small task. Wooden planks need constant attention, thanks to the sea's relentless assault. The cost: another handful of ducats for tar and pitch to keep things watertight, not to mention the labor involved. Shipworms are your arch-nemesis, tiny creatures that can turn your sturdy hull into Swiss cheese if given half a chance. Picture them as the termites of the sea, only more annoying because you can't just call an exterminator. As you look around, you realize that this venture isn't just about the tools or the ship, it's about the people. The crew is a motley bunch, unified by the quest for adventure, or at least the promise of steady pay. Among them are seasoned seamen, wide-eyed novices, and a handful of specialists like the ship's carpenter and the navigator. These are the folks whose skills, or lack thereof, determine whether you make it to your destination or end up as a cautionary tale. Political winds are as fickle as the real ones. You're sailing for a kingdom that's hungry for power and prestige. The monarchs back home are betting on you to bring back spices, gold, and tales of lands ripe for the taking. But let's not kid ourselves. It's as much about the thrill of the unknown as it is about economic gain. The world is a chessboard, and every new discovery is a potential checkmate. As the sun climbs higher, you're reminded that the sea is both a highway and a barrier, a force of nature that cares little for your ambitions. You hear tales of ships that vanished without a trace, swallowed by storms, or dashed against unseen rocks. It's enough to make you question the wisdom of setting sail at all. Yet here you are, driven by the same spirit that led countless explorers before you to take that leap into the unknown. And so, as you stand on the deck, with the wind in your hair and the vast ocean stretching endlessly before you, you realize that navigation in the age of exploration is as much about courage and curiosity as it is about tools and techniques. The day is young, and though the journey is fraught with uncertainty, the promise of discovery beckons. As you stand there, surveying the vast expanse of ocean, you can almost hear the creaking timbers whispering tales of the men aboard. Each one has a role to play in this floating microcosm of society, and you'd better believe there's a hierarchy here as rigid as the ship's own masts. At the top of the food chain is the captain, a figure who commands respect, fear, or both, kind of like the high school principal you never quite dared to cross. The captain's word is law, and his primary currency is authority. He's the one who makes the life or death decisions, but let's not pretend he's a lone wolf. He's backed by a small army of officers and specialists who keep this wooden beast moving forward. Now, beneath this tip of the shipboard pyramid lies the first mate, the captain's right-hand man, who ensures the crew is actually doing their jobs and not just lounging around pretending to scrub the deck. Think of him as the ship's middle management. Below him, things get a tad more crowded. You've got the boatswain, the master of the everyday hustle and bustle, who's basically the guy shouting orders to keep things shipshape. And let's not forget the navigator, that poor soul who's tasked with turning the captain's grand dreams of discovery into reality without ending up on the wrong side of the world. You could say he's the original human GPS, only without the luxury of recalculating routes. But wait, there's more. The crew is packed with specialists like the carpenter, who's got the delightful task of patching up the ship mid-voyage, because nothing says adventure like a gaping hole in your hull. And then there's the cook, The unsung hero who somehow transforms that dubious barrel of salted meat into something vaguely edible. If you're lucky, you might even have a surgeon on board, though his toolkit resembles more of a medieval torture kit than anything you'd find in a modern operating room. Leeches, anyone. Class distinctions don't just vanish because you're bobbing along on the sea. Oh no, they're alive and well, even here. Officers and specialists get the luxury of cabins. Cramped, sure, but at least they've got walls. The ordinary sailors, on the other hand, are relegated to the lower decks, where the air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and the sound of snoring, or worse, rats. These lower deck dwellers are the engine room, the ones hoisting sails and swabbing decks, all for the princely sum of a few ducats a month. Not exactly a get-rich-quick scheme. The political motivations driving this whole seafaring circus, well, they're more tangled than a sailor's knot. Monarchs are hungry for power, prestige, and new territories to slap their flags on. Each voyage is a gamble, a high-stakes game of geopolitical chess, where the pieces are human lives and the board is the uncharted ocean. You're part of a nation's grand strategy, whether you're aware of it or not. It's about expanding borders and filling coffers with gold and spices, while keeping rival powers at bay. It's a heady mix of ambition and trepidation, where glory and disaster are two sides of the same coin. And let's talk about the myths versus the gritty reality of life on deck. You might imagine the romance of adventure, of brave men facing the unknown with nothing but a trusty compass and a song in their hearts. But let's cut through the poetic fog. Life at sea is more about relentless labor and less about swashbuckling heroics. The food. If hardtack isn't your thing, you'll be thrilled to know the menu includes salted pork so tough it could double as a doorstop. And let's not even get started on scurvy, the sailor's curse. This delightful ailment turns you into a walking medical horror show, thanks to a diet so lacking in vitamin C that your gums bleed and your teeth threaten to jump ship. Living quarters are another romantic notion best left in storybooks. Forget personal space. Your bed is a hammock strung up wherever you can find room, swinging with the ship's every move. Ever tried sleeping while being rocked back and forth like a metronome? It's an acquired taste, to say the least. Privacy is a luxury reserved for nobody, as you're constantly in close quarters with your fellow sailors, sharing everything from meals to illnesses. Yet, despite the cramped quarters and dubious dining options, there's a camaraderie that forms among the crew, a bond forged by shared hardship and the collective pursuit of a distant horizon. It's a lifestyle that's both brutal and beautiful, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. And as the sun arcs across the sky, casting long shadows on the deck, you can't help but feel a strange sort of kinship with these men of the sea, driven by the same curiosity and courage that led them to forsake the safety of the shore for the uncertainty of the waves. So, as you stand there, the day stretching out before you like an unrolled map, you realize that this is just the beginning. The sea is a vast, untamed frontier, and you are but a small part of a much larger story, one of exploration, ambition, and the relentless human drive to discover what lies beyond the horizon. The journey is far from over, and the promise of what's to come is enough to keep you anchored to this life of salty air and endless adventure. As the day advances, and the sun hangs directly overhead, you find yourself smack dab in the middle of the ocean, Mother Nature's own version of a blank canvas, minus the luxury of an undo button. Welcome to the high-stakes world of ocean navigation in the 15th century, where the elements are as predictable as a game of dice. You're not just battling the waves and the wind, you're grappling with the very concept of time and space. Talk about a headache. Let's dive into the navigational charts, the ancient mariner's equivalent of Google Maps, only without the soothing voice telling you to turn left in 500 meters. These charts are a patchwork of guesswork and hope, sprinkled with artistic flair that would make a modern cartographer wince. Lines, circles, and symbols cover the parchment, each representing something crucial, currents, hazards, or the occasional mermaid for good measure. But truth be told, these charts were often speculative at best and pure fantasy at worst. Now, onto dead reckoning, the navigational method that's less about actual death and more about playing a high-stakes game of guess where we are. This isn't for the faint of heart. It involves estimating your current position based on your last known location, speed, and direction. Translation. You're basically a human calculator, minus the batteries, trying to figure out if you're heading toward the new world or just a watery grave. And while we're on the subject, let's debunk a little myth. Contrary to popular belief, most educated folks in Columbus's time didn't think the Earth was flat. They'd known it was round since the days of the ancient Greeks. The real debate was about the size of the Earth, and Columbus, well, he was a bit on the optimistic side, underestimating the planet's circumference like a kid who thinks he can finish a triple-decker Sunday solo. Speaking of Columbus, let's unearth some truths about these so-called discoveries. The idea of brave explorers charting unknown territories is as irresistible as it is misleading. These voyages often relied heavily on indigenous knowledge. Columbus himself was guided by native Caribbean sailors who knew these waters far better than any European. So, while Europe was busy patting itself on the back for discovering lands that were already inhabited, the real heroes were often the local guides who steered these newcomers away from disaster. And let's talk about the real threats of uncharted waters. Picture this. A storm brews on the horizon, dark clouds rolling in like an unwelcome guest who's overstayed their welcome. The wind howls, and suddenly your ship's rudder feels like a toothpick in a hurricane. You're at the mercy of the sea, and no amount of celestial navigation is going to save you now. It's moments like these that strip away the romance of exploration and lay bare its raw, terrifying reality. And let's not forget the lurking threat of scurvy, that charming disease that turns sailors into walking anatomical diagrams. It's a grim reminder that for all the glory of exploration, the human body remains a fragile, demanding vessel. Back on deck, the crew is busy managing the sails, adjusting them to catch the wind just right. Every movement is a dance, a well-rehearsed choreography of ropes, pulleys, and human endurance. There's no room for error, just as there's no room for doubt in the face of nature's whims. It's a constant battle against the elements, a test of skill and nerve that separates the seasoned mariner from the landlubber. As you stand there, your mind drifts to the economics of it all. This isn't just about exploration for exploration's sake. It's about the promise of wealth, untold riches waiting to be scooped up by those daring or desperate enough to venture into the unknown. Spices, gold, and other exotic goods were the currency of power, the keys to influence and control. And so, the race was on, each nation vying to outdo the other, to stake their claim on the bounty of the world. But remember, this wasn't a one-way street. Indigenous peoples had their own sophisticated trade networks long before Europeans showed up, and their knowledge of local resources was invaluable. Yet, history often glosses over these contributions, preferring the more palatable narrative of European ingenuity and bravery. It's a tangled web of power dynamics and cultural exchange, a reminder that the story of exploration is far more complex than it seems. So here you are, standing on the precipice of history, part of a grand adventure that's equal parts peril and promise. The sea stretches out before you, a vast expanse of opportunity and danger. And as you navigate these waters, both literal and metaphorical, you realize that the true art of navigation isn't just about finding your way across the ocean. It's about understanding your place in the world and acknowledging the myriad forces that shape it. As the day wears on and the sun begins its slow descent towards the horizon, you can't help but feel a mix of apprehension and excitement. The journey is far from over, and the challenges ahead are as daunting as they are exhilarating. But that's the nature of exploration, isn't it? To venture into the unknown, to push the limits of what's possible, and to embrace the uncertainty of what lies beyond the next wave. And so, you press on, guided by the stars, the charts, and the indomitable human spirit that drives you ever forward. As the sun dips lower in the sky, casting an amber glow over the vast, churning sea, you find yourself pondering the high-stakes economics that fuel this age of exploration. If you thought today's investment landscape was cutthroat, just wait until you hear about the 15th century version of venture capitalism. Welcome to the world where monarchs like Ferdinand and Isabella aren't just royal figures. They're the original Shark Tank, backing voyages with the promise of gold and glory as bait. Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain were the ultimate power couple, but instead of reality TV fame, they had a taste for geopolitical dominance and piles of spices. Columbus's infamous 1492 voyage, that wasn't just a whimsical jaunt across the Atlantic, it was a calculated business investment, with the Spanish crown footing the bill in hopes of a lucrative return. And we're not talking pocket change. Outfitting a fleet could set back a monarch by around 10,000 maravedis, which, in today's terms, is like betting your life savings on one very brave or very foolish sailor. But why spices, you ask? In the Europe of yore, spices were more than just a way to jazz up a bland piece of meat. They were the Bitcoin of their time. Nutmeg, cloves, and pepper were worth their weight in gold, literally. Why? Because they masked the taste of meat that was well past its expiration date, which, let's be honest, was most of it. A pound of pepper could cost as much as a week's wages for a laborer. Talk about a hot commodity. This drive for spices and riches led to fierce competition among European powers, each one jockeying for a slice of the pie. The Portuguese were already making headway around Africa, and the Spanish were determined to find a quicker route west. It was a game of nautical one-upmanship, with each nation desperately trying to outmaneuver the other. The stakes were high, and the potential payoff was immense, if you could survive the trip and actually make it back to brag about it. But let's not gloss over the ripple effects of these endeavors. While European nations were busy drawing lines and claiming lands as their own, they often ignored the inconvenient truth that these territories were already home to indigenous peoples with their own complex societies and trade networks. The economic impact on these communities was devastating, as they were often forced into exploitative labor systems like the encomienda, which was about as humane as a pirate's code of ethics. Translation: not very. The spice trade was the tip of the iceberg, the glamorous front in a much darker economic landscape. For the indigenous populations, European arrival often meant the disruption of age-old trade routes and the imposition of foreign economic systems that prioritized profit over people. It was capitalism at its most ruthless, with entire societies restructured or destroyed to fit European needs. Meanwhile, back on the high seas, every day is a financial balancing act. Ships are both assets and liabilities, with maintenance costs that could sink your voyage before you ever hit land. The crew's wages are a constant drain on resources, and let's not forget the cost of food and supplies, which can swell faster than a sailor's ego after a successful landfall. It's a tightrope walk, with disaster lurking at every wave and wind shift. As the afternoon light begins to fade, you can't shake the feeling that these voyages are more than just for glory or discovery. They're about cold, hard cash, with national pride thrown in for good measure. In this world, explorers are not just daring adventurers, they're corporate emissaries, tasked with expanding their nation's economic horizons at any cost. And as you stand on the deck, with the shadow of the ship stretching out over the water, you realize that the sea is as much a battlefield for economic supremacy as it is a path to new lands. Each wave carries the weight of ambition, greed, and the relentless drive to conquer the unknown, all in the name of profit and power. So, as the day slips into evening and the stars begin to dart the sky, you find yourself part of this grand, tumultuous dance, a dance that's as much about the clinking of coins as it is about the crashing of waves. And with that, you brace yourself for the night ahead, knowing full well that the story of exploration is far from over, with chapters yet to be written and mysteries still to be unraveled. And as the sun slips behind the horizon, painting the sky in hues of burnt orange and deep purple, you're left pondering the legacy of this era, the age of exploration. It's a time that's often wrapped in the glittering paper of adventure and discovery, but let's rip off the wrapping and peek inside, shall we? Spoiler alert, it's a mixed bag. First up, the good stuff. Thanks to these daring mariners, Europe's culinary scene got a serious upgrade. Imagine a pre-exploration world where potatoes, tomatoes, and chocolate were nothing more than exotic dreams. These voyages opened up new trade routes that brought a smorgasbord of flavors to European tables. The famous Columbian exchange was like the world's most ambitious potluck, with goods like maize and sweet potatoes making their way to Europe, while wheat and livestock headed west. It's a gastronomic revolution that would make any foodie swoon. And it's a big, but there's a darker side lurking beneath the surface. For every galleon packed with riches, there were entire civilizations upended, with indigenous populations swept aside like chess pieces in a game they never agreed to play. Colonization was the flip side of exploration's gleaming coin, bringing with it exploitation, disease, and the kind of cultural bulldozing that makes you wonder if progress is always a synonym for better. Take the Taino people, for instance. They were among the first to encounter Columbus, and within decades their population had plummeted due to disease and harsh labor conditions imposed by the encomienda system. It's a sobering reminder that the age of exploration was less about noble quests and more about the assertion of power and control. The human cost was staggering, a fact often glossed over in favor of tales of gold and glory. Yet, for all its faults, this period laid the groundwork for modern navigation. The techniques refined during these voyages, dead reckoning, celestial navigation, and the use of newfangled contraptions like the sextant, paved the way for future seafarers. Fast forward to today, and you'll find that the GPS in your phone owes its existence to these early adventurers who dared to sail beyond the edge of the map. And let's not forget the cartographers, the unsung heroes who turned the chaotic scrawls of early maps into something resembling the world we know today. Gerardus Mercator, with his 1569 world map, introduced a projection that sailors could actually use to navigate straight lines, sort of. It was a game changer, even if it did stretch Greenland to the size of Africa. Details, details. So, what lessons can we draw from this era of high seas and higher stakes? For one, it's a testament to the indomitable human spirit, our relentless drive to push boundaries and explore the unknown. But it's also a cautionary tale about the consequences of unchecked ambition and the dangers of seeing the world as something to be conquered rather than understood. As you stand on the deck, feeling the cool night air and watching the stars emerge one by one, it's clear that the age of exploration is a story of duality. It's both triumphant and tragic, a testament to human ingenuity and a cautionary tale of hubris. And while we can celebrate the advancements it brought, we must also remember those who paid the price. The evening deepens, and the ship becomes a silhouette against the starlit sky. The crew moves quietly now, their earlier chatter replaced by the soft rustle of sails and the creak of timbers. It's a moment of reflection, a chance to consider the legacy we've inherited from these explorers. Their voyages reshaped the world, for better and for worse, leaving a trail that we still navigate today. As the night stretches on, you can't help but feel a sense of connection to those who dared to chart the uncharted, to those who looked to the horizon and saw not an end, but a beginning. It's a reminder that exploration, in all its forms, is part of our DNA, a testament to our unyielding curiosity and the eternal question, what lies beyond? With these thoughts swirling in your mind, you head below deck, the gentle rocking of the ship lulling you into a contemplative calm. The age of exploration may be behind us, but its echoes remain, a complex legacy that continues to shape our world and challenge us to consider the true cost of discovery. And as you drift into sleep, you realize that the spirit of exploration, much like the sea itself, is timeless, ever changing, ever challenging, ever calling us to venture just a little farther.